Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, live from New York with David Gura, Christina Ruffini, and Lisa Mateo. The latest headlines, key analysis, big interviews, and the stories that hit home on your days off.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. We are coming to you live from Bloomberg World Headquarters here in New York. I'm Christina Ruffini.
I'm David Gura, alongside Lisa Mateo. Of course, we're coming to you across Bloomberg's many platforms on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, on Bloomberg.com, and on the Bloomberg Business app. A lot to cover this morning as the president waits for a response from Iran to his proposal to end the conflict in the Middle East. Much more on that over the course of the hour. But first, let's get a check of the headlines from Lisa Mateo. Lisa.
And let's start with that cruise ship that is experiencing a deadly Hantavirus outbreak. It's making its way to the Canary Islands. Now, that ship is expected to arrive at Tenerife tomorrow. Spanish authorities, they're preparing to receive more than 140 passengers and crew members, where health officials have said they will perform careful evacuations. Now, the U.S. agreed to send a plane to return more than a dozen Americans who are still on that ship. Those passengers will be isolated at the National Quarantine Unit at the University of Nebraska Medical Center in Nebraska Medicine. Michael Wadman is director of the unit.
There are 20 spaces in the quarantine unit, and we're making preparations to receive the 19 passengers, the U.S. citizens, who will be repatriated. The quarantine unit enjoys an outstanding facility that's designed to limit the spread of the pathogen that we're monitoring for. All of these passengers will be monitored for symptoms. They're all well at this time and will be coming to us for monitoring.
Now, Hantavirus is a rare family of viruses that are carried by rodents. So far, 3 passengers have died. In other news, the U.S. still awaiting a response from Iran as to its latest proposal to end the war. Now, President Donald Trump, he was asked about it last night as he left the White House for Virginia. Take a listen.
We'll see what happens. Look, they have no military. They have not a lot left. We'll see what happens.
President Trump's plan will propose that the Islamic Republic reopen the Strait of Hormuz and the U.S. send a blockade ports over the next month. Now we go to the Russia-Ukraine war, where President Trump announced a 3-day ceasefire, also a prisoner swap between the two nations. He spoke about it with reporters yesterday.
And they also agreed to give 1,000 on each side, 1,000 prisoners back. So they're going to be transferring almost immediately 1,000 prisoners from each side. That's very good. Russia, Ukraine.
Now, that ceasefire, it would last through today through Monday. It coincides with Russia's Victory Day celebrations to mark World War II victory over Nazi Germany. Ukraine has intensified strikes on Russia in recent months, regularly hitting locations deeper inside the country. When asked if he would send a team to Moscow to negotiate further, Christina and David, President Trump said he would do it if he thought it would help.
Lisa, thank you very much. A less extravagant military day parade there.
Yes, they're a little short on manpower and equipment, given the resources they've expended in the war in Ukraine. But remember, I mean, this is a big deal for Russia. We always talk about U.S. casualties, European casualties. Russia lost over 24 million people, the USSR, fighting World War II.
Commemorating that today. Yeah. All right. Dramatic new pictures this morning from CENTCOM, released in the last few hours, showing a U.S. fighter jet disabling 2 Iranian-flagged tankers, which it says were violating the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports. Precision munitions were fired into their funnels. That was followed by flames and large plumes of smoke, as you can see there if you're watching on TV.
But even with these strikes, the administration still says it's expecting a reply from Tehran on the newest terms for ending the war. That answer was expected yesterday. We don't yet know if it was received. But here's Secretary of State Marco Rubio from Rome on Friday.
We're expecting a response from them. We'll see what the response entails. The hope is it's something that it can put us into a serious process of negotiation. Their system is still highly fractured and a bit dysfunctional as well. So that may be serving as an impediment. I hope it's a serious offer. I really do.
Joining us now, 2 morning regulars here on Bloomberg This Weekend, Abir Abu Omar, Bloomberg's Deputy UAE Bureau Chief, and Jeff Mason, White House correspondent, who is in the press pool this morning, but alas, he is not in a van and does not appear to be wearing his hat. Jeff, we do have obviously some serious things we need to get to. So the U.S. is waiting on an offer, but still striking in the Strait. The Iranian foreign minister said, quote, every time a diplomatic solution is on the table, the U.S. opts for a reckless military adventure. Is it crude pressure tactics? What is the state of play here? And are we really expecting to get a response any minute?
Good question. As of last night, the president at least wasn't ready to tell us that a response had come in. You played the clip earlier as he was leaving the White House, and he said he was expecting a response last evening. I hung around the White House for his return from his live golf dinner, and he came back around 10 o'clock ish. And we shouted questions at him then as well. Did you get a response? Did you get a response? And he didn't respond to those questions and just walked by. But from what he said and from what Secretary Rubio said, that's what they're waiting for, and still TBD on what it says and whether the Iranians are willing to engage in a way that the United States wants. The response or the note that you just made that they said about hostilities impacting their desire to continue has been part of the ups and downs between the two sides really since the war began.
Abir, let me turn to you. And we have this statement in a recent Bloomberg piece from the foreign ministry in Iran saying Tehran's response is under review. Jeff giving us the latest there from the president, who is occupied this weekend with a number of things, including this golf tournament in Virginia. What have we heard from Tehran beyond that? What are they looking at, and how likely are we to get a response from our reporting in the hours ahead?
Yeah, good morning, David. So that is the latest copy that we have, essentially the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson saying that the proposal where President Trump gave Iran until yesterday to respond to is still under review. Now, Iran did not give a timeline to the response. That's something else that is worthy of noting here. So we're supposed to hear from them imminently about this response. Now, Iran did come out over the past few weeks, and they have called the U.S. proposals that have come through maximalist, and that a lot of them are actually, and I quote, some of the Iranian officials saying that some of the requests that the U.S. is putting through are quite impossible. But let me bring you back to the beginning of this week and the region and some of the escalations that you guys have mentioned at the top of the show. And essentially, these escalations that we're seeing across the Strait of Hormuz have caught up to where I'm sitting right now in the UAE, in Dubai. On Monday, we had Monday evening, starting at 7 p.m., about 4 missile threat alerts that came through our phones. And essentially, the defense ministry here came out later and said that those were Iranian attacks that the UAE defense system had intercepted, about 15 missiles all in all, and a few drones. So those escalations are still very much there. They're still very much in the sphere of the Gulf region. But both the U.S. and Iran came out and said that those attacks do not violate the ceasefire clauses that have been put through on April 8th. And further, I mean, the escalations that we've seen across the Strait of Hormuz have so far not impacted the ceasefire that is already in place. So that's a positive sign. But you're seeing the market reaction to those kind of seesaw requests that are being put through by either the U.S. or Iran. And they're essentially just behaving markets, whether it's energy or equities, are essentially behaving in response to those direct calls from either President Trump or the Iranian side. But as you mentioned, we're waiting to see the Iranian response. Again, was supposed to come out yesterday, or that's the expectation of the Trump administration. It's still not out yet. So something that we're keeping a very close eye on over the next few days.
Jeff, I also want to ask you about this Washington Post report, because we've been hearing messaging from the administration saying Iran is really feeling the hurt. They're getting close to the breaking point. This has really been effective. But the Washington Post reports on confidential intelligence analysis sent to the White House. Policymakers are being told Iran can survive for 3 to 4 months before facing severe economic hardships. Do you think that changes the calculation at all? Because that's 3 or 4 months of this and 3 or 4 months closer to November.
Well, it certainly raises questions about A, what the president and the White House are saying about this, and B, exactly what you just asked, whether or not Iran can last significantly longer than right now people perhaps expect in the West. Yes, it could delay this conflict, or it could extend this conflict. The Iranians, at least from their rhetoric, have suggested that they feel that they're in a stronger position than the United States. President Trump has been using rhetoric saying that the war is over, saying that the conflict is over. That in part has some connection to Congress and the deadline that passed there. But the truth is it hasn't. I mean, there's a ceasefire, and that ceasefire has more or less held, with the exception of these skirmishes that have happened in the Strait of Hormuz. But Iran is not, so far, until the United States gets that response, specifically standing down. And President Trump, despite saying they want a deal and he wants a deal, has also used escalatory language to say that if a deal doesn't come, then the strikes, the bombs will flow and fall again, and at an even more intense level than they did before the ceasefire.
Abir, the energy story here is so crucial as it has been since the beginning of this war. We know that Vice President J.D. Vance met with the Qatari Prime Minister this week. They talked about regional security. They talked about Iran. They talked about natural gas as well. I'm curious what you can tell us about the level of coordination, cooperation between the U.S. And the Prime Minister right now, and sort of what came out of those meetings and the degree to which they're satisfied with what they're hearing from the United States about the trajectory of this war.
Yeah, so look, I mean, the meeting that happened between the US Vice President and the Qatari Prime Minister, we had a readout of that, and it's essentially what you just said. They are, talking about those LNG shipments that have traditionally gone through the Strait of Hormuz. A fraction of that is going through. Look, some of our reporting actually suggests, this was a report that came out by Bloomberg a couple of days ago, suggesting that perhaps some oil shipments and some LNG shipments are going through the Strait of Hormuz that are not being tracked by shipping companies, and that we name quite a few companies that are the biggest ones in the region. That's Saudi Aramco and the UAE's ADNOC, that where their ships are essentially having a little bit of success moving through. Now, again, we're talking about from over 12 million tankers going through the Strait of Hormuz to about 500,000, so very small figure. But some of what we heard from that meeting that happened between Vance and the Qatari Prime Minister is that the U.S. and Qatar are still keeping those relationships that have enabled them in the past to essentially carry through those wider LNG shipments. But something else that's quite interesting here is, and I allude to some of what you've mentioned about the relationships between Gulf countries and the United States and Israel as well. We're seeing a little bit of a friction between Gulf countries now. When the UAE was attacked earlier this week, we saw a flood of world leaders, including Saudi Arabia's MBS. We saw Egypt's president, Sisi, also coming to Abu Dhabi to show their solidarity. Now, MBS did hold a call with the UAE's leader, MBZ. But something that I've been hearing a lot about is post this war, what happens to this alliance in the GCC, especially in the wake of the UAE leaving OPEC? What does that mean for the wider cooperation within the 6-country GCC? We're seeing a little bit of friction signs there. And so that is something that I thought was quite interesting to think about once this war, if this war is over, David.
And I think exactly what you just talked about, Iran has created this Persian Gulf Strait Authority, and I'm sure you're hearing the same thing, Abir and Jeff, but sources I'm talking to in the region are really afraid that the U.S. is going to leave with some sort of half measure that kind of enables Iran to, if not stop traffic in the Strait altogether, to taper it or control it or benefit or tax it or toll it or any of these things. And I think fears are really growing. I kind of have the same question for both of you, but Abir, I'm going to start with you. Who is running this policy, both in the White House and Iran? Abir, CNN has a report that U.S. intel says Iran's supreme leader is still shaping war policy, but we haven't really seen him. The Iranians are saying he's in complete health. Do we know who's running this on Iran's side, or is that still a little bit opaque as to who's actually making these decisions?
Yeah, look, I mean, you're absolutely right. We haven't seen him. A lot of reasons behind why we haven't seen him go through a lot. Some reports earlier by the Wall Street Journal, we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, say that his health condition is in tatters a little bit, that he needs plastic surgery. Now, none of this has been verified, but a lot of what we're hearing from the Iranian side is that he's still calling the calls behind the scenes, but this collection of Iranian officials that have been front and center. Now that includes the foreign minister Abbas Araghchi, who has been in China meeting with his counterpart. We understand as well that meeting in China has led to some kind of resolution, or not necessarily a resolution, but to some kind of breakthrough in Iran coming back to the table. The spokesperson in the ministry and the head of the parliament, as well as members of the IRGC, are still very much, the officials that are keeping track of these conversations that are happening with the U.S., Christina.
Jeff, same question to you. Rubio, Vance, Witkoff, Trump. Yes?
Who's handling it on the U.S. side, or
who's really driving this policy? Yeah, is it a combination of all of the above?
Yes, although I would say that, as with all things foreign policy, and for that matter domestic policy, everything comes down to President Trump. This is someone who follows his instincts, who can sometimes change his mind on a whim. He has lieutenants, and certainly Witkoff and Kushner have been his top lieutenants in terms of negotiation, with J.D. Vance also stepping in for one set of very high-profile talks in Pakistan, as you well know. But at the end of the day, it's President Trump who's driving this train. It's President Trump who is deciding when he's ready to end, and deciding whether or not to issue additional threats or try to be de-escalatory. And he's done both.
He's done both. On that last question to you, Jeff, just about this other ceasefire we saw between Ukraine and Russia, announced by the president at the request, I gather, of President Putin. What do you make of this coming about? And I guess there's the hope here that could be extended further. Any signs that might be in the offing?
Well, I actually asked President Trump that last night as he was leaving the White House, and he said that it was possible that ceasefire between the two could be extended. Now, I don't know if that's based in anything beyond optimism, but it was interesting that he announced this in part because the Russia-Ukraine war, though of course we know it's still going on and still very intense, has gotten a lot less attention over the last several weeks, at least from this side of the pond, as President Trump has focused on the Iran war. So he portrayed it as a hopeful sign and as something that either could be extended or could lead to a broader agreement at some point between those two sides.
All right, Abir Abu Omar in UAE, our Deputy Bureau Chief there, and Jeff Mason, our White House correspondent, traveling with the pool today. Thank you both so much.
Christina, I want to go back to what you were saying about that parade and the importance of this holiday. Your sense of whether or not this could be extended. I mean, our focus has been not squarely on what's been happening in the Middle East, but of course also on Ukraine as well, and some indication that this might be lasting.
I mean, I don't know anything that you haven't seen, but it's an interesting moment because the great BBC reporter, Steve Rosenberg, who's been in Moscow forever, actually did a big piece last week about how the sea change in Russia is actually starting to be felt, and the population is starting to feel this war, and Putin is suddenly under more pressure than ever to bring it to a close. So this is a good sign, perhaps, that he's willing to negotiate. The problem is he's still probably not willing to capitulate on those red lines that Ukraine says are also their red lines, and without someone like the U.S. forcing that to happen, I don't know where they go.
Optimistic talk from the president yesterday, as Jeff mentioned. Well, coming up here, local elections posing a key test for the UK Prime Minister. What will it mean for the future of Keir Starmer's Labour Party? We'll talk about that straight ahead here on Bloomberg This Weekend, on Bloomberg TV, Bloomberg Radio, at Bloomberg.com, and on the Bloomberg Business app.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on today's top stories. And Frontier Airlines, they say that a pedestrian was struck by a plane leaving to Denver International Airport last night. It happened on the runway. It forced the pilots to abort the takeoff. Smoke filled the cabin. The aircraft, it was carrying 224 passengers, 7 crew members. No word on the condition of the person who was hit by that plane. A national redistricting battle over U.S. House seats while it's swung toward Republicans. A Virginia court invalidated a Democratic gerrymandering effort, and Republicans in Alabama, they approved plans for a new primary elections if courts allow GOP-drawn House districts to be used in the November midterm elections. Protests, well, they took place at the Alabama State House. Republican lawmakers in Louisiana and South Carolina also face opposition as they presented plans yesterday to redraw their congressional districts. The U.S. military struck another alleged drug trafficking boat. It took place at the Eastern Pacific Ocean. 2 men were killed. 1 survived. The U.S. Southern Command said it immediately notified the U.S. Coast Guard to activate the search and rescue system for the survivor. And the Pentagon has started releasing hundreds more declassified files linked to decades of UFO sightings. Now, they say the move allows Americans to study the material and decide for themselves if aliens are real. It's part of a push from the Trump administration to provide more transparency to the public. David and Christina.
I've yet to look at this cache of documents.
You guys, do you believe in aliens?
Curious?
Well, that's for another time.
No.
We'll have a conversation at another time, but I'll dig through those.
All right, thanks, Lisa.
Thank you,
I was
Lisa.
reading, someone this morning was saying, don't go through them because you'll get stuck. They're so interesting. Like, you gotta commit some time to it because you start digging and it's like a rabbit hole. They're very cool. So it's on my to-do list.
Stay tuned, everyone.
Our Monday, Tuesday off. I guess I'll be doing that. All right, while the U.S. looks towards November's midterms, the U.K. has just wrapped a pivotal vote that could put Prime Minister Keir Starmer's party and his job at risk.
Joining us now from London is the anchor of Daybreak Europe on Bloomberg Radio, Caroline Hepker. Great to have you with us, Caroline. Let's start with a very basic question. You'll forgive us, sitting here in New York. Explain the importance of these races. Is there an American analog to what we saw took place in the UK this week? These are council elections. What does that mean exactly? Situate that in the broader governmental structure.
Use very small words, please. Yes.
Okay, very good morning to both of you. It's lunchtime here in London. So the council elections are for authorities that look after things like roads and rubbish collection across the different local regions in England. But they also have big responsibilities for things like caring for the elderly and the disabled. The elections have also, though, encompassed regional elections in the nations and regions of the UK. Remember, the UK is made up of 4 different parts. There's Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. There were votes for the parliaments that have devolved powers over things like education. In Scotland, they can also they have their own legal system, for example. So they have separate parliaments in Wales and Scotland. There were votes for those too. Midterms, no. I'd say that political watchers in the UK hate that term. But the analogue is that we are halfway through this term for the Labour Party that got into power in 2024, landslide election, Keir Starmer being the Prime Minister. So we are halfway through almost that parliamentary term. So I suppose that is the read across, that this is a judgment on the Labour Party halfway through its term. The other reason that I think that it's massively important, and usually, look, local elections, I will say, honestly, are not often that important. But this time around, we are seeing the breakup, maybe the end, once and for all, of what has been a duopoly, a two-party system between Labour and the Conservatives, because we've had this surge for other more populist type parties like Reform UK, like the Greens, and then of course there are the nationalists in Wales and Scotland as well. So that's really why it's important.
I was going to say, is that what the big deal is? Because they're not electing parliamentary seats, right? This is not like he's lost control of his government necessarily, but it looks really bad. And to your point, I've read 2 analyses. One is that it's local elections, it's overblown, people are making a big deal out of this. But we were talking in the newsroom today, if this were, one party or even a third party, to your point, blowing out every local mayoral, state Senate seat in the US, that is something we'd be talking about, because those are the winds of change and the pressure on the 2 dominant parties. What's your take?
Absolutely. I think it's hugely important. And you only have to look at what is happening today to understand how much peril the Prime Minister is really in. Look, since about Christmas, Keir Starmer has been under enormous pressure. The Labour Party is deeply unpopular. The Prime Minister is even more unpopular than his party. People in Britain feel deeply pessimistic about the economy. If you look at the Ipsos polling, 78% of people in Britain think that the UK economy is going to get worse over the next 12 months. Voters are very, very dissatisfied. And if you look this morning, the Prime Minister is having to shore up his leadership. There have been rumours maybe that he would face a challenge from another one of his MPs for that leadership role. That hasn't happened so far. But the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has had to bring in a former heavyweight. This is the former Prime Minister, former Chancellor Gordon Brown, as an advisor on global finance.
Wait, really? Gordon Brown is back in our lives again?
Yes.
I totally missed this. Okay.
Yeah, the man who basically got Britain through the 2007-8 global financial crisis, he is back. He's effectively got a mandate now to do something that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was trying to do, which is to try to, improve Britain's financial relationships with the world with a particular focus on Europe. Now, that is going to be quite difficult for various reasons, but I think it shows the level of peril. Also, you've had 30 MPs coming out saying that they want a timetable for when Keir Starmer is going to go. That is the level of pressure. The thing that we haven't had yet, Christina, is any challengers actually coming forwards. We know that the likes of Andy Burnham, who's the mayor up in Manchester, Wes Streeting, who's the health secretary, Angela Rayner, who is the former deputy leader under Keir Starmer but had to resign because of a tax issue. All of those candidates are in the mix as potential new leaders. So we're sort of still in that problematic period for UK politics of maybe losing leaders quickly, one after another, because, as I say, the economic challenges that Britain has, neither the Tories and Labour for the first couple of years haven't really solved them.
Caroline, you described the pressure that Keir Starmer is under, how he's processing all of these results. Tell us a bit about how Nigel Farage might be thinking about what happened over the course of the last few days. Of course, he has this new party. Reform Party did quite well in these elections. The Green Party, I think, did better than a lot of folks expected as well. So as you mentioned, we're moving away from this dual party system to something different. How does this change the calculus for Nigel Farage and others?
Yes, absolutely. Nigel Farage's Reform UK party was basically non-existent in 2022 when he had the large, big bout of local elections. Of course, he's saying that it's a historic shift in British politics, really making hay because there has been a huge swing to Reform UK in terms of the number of parties, the number of council seats that they've got. They've gained more than 1,440 seats. That is enormous. I mean, the Labour Party has lost about 1,400, just about there. Also, Reform came in with the same number of seats in the parliamentary election in Scotland, and they've come in second in Wales as well. So this is a really big step forwards for Reform UK. We knew that they were going to do well. They've been polling very well, polling actually ahead of Labour and the Conservatives for about a year in the UK. So we knew the Reform was going to do well. I think the issue to think about with Reform UK, and I've interviewed Nigel Farage in the past, they are not fighting this election on the big issues that Britain faces really in terms of the economy. They are still building out their economic policies. They are fighting this election as a protest vote, as an anti-immigrant party, as maybe, someone that can answer the local issues that people feel that they have. So yes, they are making hay. But I think that there are still going to be big questions about how they perform in the next general election, which is in 2029. Also, now that they have, so many councillors, they will be judged on their performance in the local councils. And actually delivering anything, when council budgets are under massive pressure is going to be quite difficult. But no, you've got to say that Reform have done extremely well. And as you say, the Greens have done extremely well. They look like they may be in contention in terms of talks with Plaid Cymru in Wales and also with the SNP in Scotland. So they may end up maybe bolstering those two parties in the parliaments there, in the Senate and in Holyrood to pass legislation there. So, those challenger parties have done incredibly well. We are a 7-party system in the UK now.
Before we let you go, we want to broaden out a little bit since you are the Daybreak Europe anchor. I want to ask, there was a moment where right-wing populist parties were really looking like they were getting momentum across Europe, and Farage is kind of in that vein. But we've seen other entrenched right-wing leaders and some of those right-wing parties take a step back. I think of the German party, and I think of Marine Le Pen's party. And what we're seeing in Hungary, the new Hungarian prime minister is being sworn in today. I know it's a lot to ask to extrapolate local council elections to the broader European region, but where are the winds going with those trends as we go into a series of elections coming out this fall throughout the continent?
Yes, I think you're right. Look, Reform UK and the right-wing parties in Britain have always tried to slightly distance themselves from what is happening in Europe. And although Farage, of course, is close, we know, to President Trump, also has in some senses tried to distance his movement from that. Look, I think that Europe and the UK do face a huge economic challenge, how to bring back growth, how to bring economic prosperity, how to bring jobs and better living standards. And that is why you're seeing this fraying of the political landscape. And that is as true in Britain as it is, I think, in Europe. And the question is whether those populist parties can actually deliver. And they've had a lot of tests in different European countries where they have been pushed back. We'll have to see if that is where the UK goes.
All right, Caroline, we're going to have to leave it there, but please come back and teach us more things about different election systems.
Our best to Stephen Carroll as well. Thank you,
We
Caroline.
appreciate it.
All right, the first Monday in May is iconic at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's where celebrities and fashion designers descend on the museum for the Met Gala, showing off their outfits while also donating, I should say, millions to the museum's Costume Institute.
This week, we attended the Met Gala's red carpet. It was quite the scene, seeing all the fashionistas and celebrities and interviewing a few of them who stopped by our camera.
What do you think about women putting on things and altering the shapes of their bodies? Is it always political or is it always a statement?
I think it's whatever women feel makes them more confident. And I think obviously everyone's going to have their opinion on it. Everyone always does, especially when you're in the public eye. But I've never altered the way I dress.
Everybody seems to have this warped opinion that this is fashion is a non-for-profit, and it's not.
We have, I think, such a responsibility and also an opportunity in moments of political upheaval, and I think as artists we really kind of set the tone and balance things out and bring people together. It's unifying.
What is your biggest concern about the future of business?
Where do you start? AI, having opportunities at all. It's I don't want to say impossible time. It's a difficult time.
Is art inherently political?
Yeah, don't you have to be?
Coming up, we're going to play a bit of our interview with the director, CEO Max Hollein of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He gave us a guided tour.
Let's go on a Wednesday when it was closed. It was pretty cool. Have you ever done that before?
I'd never done that before. He was fascinating, just talking about the economics of running a museum like this in the city of New York, obviously the importance of this event. But yeah, to have free reign in this vast, was it 2 million square feet?
I mean, it was incredible. To hear my heels echo along the sculpture gallery was a singular experience. All right, coming up, Korean culture is taking the world by storm to the tune of nearly $40 billion in exports every year. We're going to talk to the host of a new series, K-Everything. Daniel Dae Kim is in studio coming up on Bloomberg this weekend to take us through his entire experience, including some really big snails. We'll be right back.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg this weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. And Peter Magyar will be sworn in as Hungary's next prime minister today. It's marking an official end of Viktor Orban's 16-year rule. Now, Magyar is a former Orban insider and has vowed to tackle corruption and unlock frozen European funds to boost Hungary's economy. He promises to repair those ties with the EU and also restore Hungary's place among Western democracies as early as the end of the decade. He's expected to speak later this morning. The cannabis system back online after a cyber attack disrupted thousands of schools. Now, it happened while tens of thousands of students were studying for final exams. The outage set off panic and confusion as students and faculty members, they rely on the platform to manage grades and access course notes and assignments. To sports now, and the PGA Tour holding two events this weekend at the top-tier Truist Championship at Quail Hollow Club in Charlotte, North Carolina. Sungjae Im, he tops the leaderboard at 9 under par. And at the One Flight Myrtle Beach Classic in South Carolina, Aaron Rai, he takes the lead over Brandt Snedeker and Mark Hubbard. I am killing it in golf today. And in the NBA playoffs, here we go. This is more of my alley. The Knicks, they've taken off 3 games. They are leading the Philadelphia Sixers 3-0. Yeah, so New York, they're going to have their chance to take the series tomorrow afternoon. The Pistons and the Cavaliers, as well as the Thunder and Lakers, they play Game 3 today. David and Christina.
Thanks, Lisa. From film to television to music, even food and health and beauty, Korean culture is seeing a surge in popularity in America and around the world.
A new CNN series premiering tonight starring Daniel Dae Kim captures this K-pop phenomenon. Here's a preview.
Where are we going, Daniel?
I don't know, but wherever we're going, I want to be wearing this hat.
Oh.
I have to say, it's one of the cleanest factories I've ever seen. In Korea, you're the first person to discover this. Can we see? 보도 돼요?
네, 보도 돼요. 얘가 보통
Wow. Hi, guys. It's just a lot of them.
It is a lot.
The host and executive producer of K Everything, and apparently snail aficionado, Daniel Dae Kim, is with us now. Thank you for being here. For our radio listeners, please describe what we were just seeing on the screen.
So what you saw were what are called king snails, and they are used to produce for their snail mucin, which is the trail that they leave behind as they walk places. And that mucin is now used in cosmetic products. And we went to the factory where this mucin is harvested from these king snails.
I have to tell you, I've used that product. I kind of thought it was a synthetic facsimile.
No,
I didn't realize
mucin.
it was really from the actual
No, it's
snails.
the literal thing. And so I actually had the privilege of having the snails on my hand, and they're crawling around. They're big. I mean, for the audio listeners, they're like a good 4 inches long. So they're really big. But I will tell you that after I took the snail off my hand and my hand had dried, it was noticeably softer.
Really?
It really was. And so, I'm proof that this stuff actually has an effect.
Tell us about the genesis of this show. Why did you decide to go and make it, to focus on Korean culture?
Well, I've been noticing, how prominent Korean culture has become over the last 10 or 15 years in areas like drama, which is something I'm close to. I've been watching, movies like Parasite win the Oscar, Squid Game becoming Netflix's most watched TV show, K-pop Demon Hunters becoming Netflix's most watched movie. So, it was staring me in the face, and then I realized not only is it drama, but it's food, it's beauty, it's music. Of course, everyone knows K-pop, and so I thought it was a perfect time to kind of showcase this culture to the world.
Did you not have enough jobs? You needed to come do my job. You're an actor, you're a producer. Now you're doing our job. I was watching this last night, and I was getting aggressively jealous because you talked to so many fun people. One of my favorite segments was in the episode we got on K-Beauty. Is you go to explain it. It's when you do your resume in Korea, it mostly a lot of times includes a photo. And you, who I've known you forever, so I don't like to give you compliments, but other people find you to be a very attractive man. The amount of photoshopping they did on your face to make it acceptable for a resume is terrifying. And this is a standard thing.
It is. Well, it's no longer required, but for a while, employers were requiring a photo to go along with your resume. And so Koreans, would start to stretch the boundaries of what they actually look like. So you can go to these photo booth places and you can ask for levels of retouching. And one is like K-pop goddess. and what they do is they'll retouch not only your skin, but they'll make your eyes symmetrical. They'll change your jawline subtly. They'll fix a crooked smile, whiten your teeth. But it's not so drastic that it's not you, but they call it the best version of you.
You make this series, and I imagine you're wrestling with why Korean culture seems to be so resonant globally and so resonant at this moment. What's your thinking on that?
It's a good question. Korea came from a war-torn, poverty-stricken nation just a few generations ago to one of the most modern civilizations in the world. And I think it has something to do with the competitive nature and the pride of the Korean people. And both those things are positives and negatives. So one of the things I did at the end of every interview was ask the interview subjects, what are 5 words you would use to describe the Korean society? And every one of them said competitive.
Is that right?
Yeah. And so that competitive nature, that drive, actually propels them to succeed in areas in such a short, compressed time. And at the same time, it can make it difficult at times to live there if you're falling behind or perceived to be falling behind.
So talk us through the other episodes. You did one on K-pop, you did one on K-beauty. What's the breadth of it, and what was your favorite one?
They were all pretty cool, but I have to say, because I'm a stranger in a strange land when it comes to K-beauty, that was the one that I think I had the most fun with. I actually went to a very well-known dermatologist in Seoul and underwent a procedure where she injected salmon sperm into my face.
Salmon sperm.
Sure.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah,
How was that?
It was actually interesting. I'd heard horror stories about people doing laser treatments and they do them and you can't be seen for weeks because you look like a zombie. But Korea's techniques are so advanced that they give you the treatments and you can go about your business as soon as you're finished. And and they're relatively painless. And they're quick.
And they're more affordable,
cheap.
right?
Yeah, that's the thing. They're super cheap relative to the United States. And so, beauty, cosmetics, tourism is actually on the rise there. There's this one region where, or one part of the city where all the plastic surgery clinics are, and you walk down the street and sometimes you look like you're on the set of Walking Dead because everyone's in like bandages as they're walking down the street and sitting in cafes. It's very surreal.
You opened the door to us talking about the economics of all of this. I'd love to get into that a little bit as well. Yes, there's the massive cultural resonance that we've seen, but this is a huge business. Korean culture, the export of Korean culture is a huge business worldwide.
Yeah, it's a huge business and it's government supported. There are initiatives on behalf of the government to introduce Korean food to the world. We get into that a little bit into the series. They've embraced K-pop in such a way that they're active ambassadors for Korea, and anyone who's a prominent figure in the global spotlight is honored there, is encouraged by the government, not in such a way that it's like a communist country, but they're celebrated and they take a lot of pride in those who succeeded.
I do want to point out, Daniel and I are actually friends. I don't tease just random celebrities about their looks on air. I've teased him for over a decade about that. So just to be clear, I'll be nicer to others.
In the wake of that,
yeah.
You've known
Please
him for
don't
a
cancel
while.
me. I'm teasing. He knows that.
Were you a big Lost fan?
I wasn't. I didn't watch Lost. I mean, he was also on Hawaii Five-0, and then he got nominated for a Tony for his play Yellowface on Broadway. But no, we met at a dinner in Washington randomly a couple years ago.
I'm just amazed by the K-beauty stuff with the snail slime.
Have you never tried that?
Sperm? Like,
Salmon
what's going
sperm.
on?
No.
Yes.
He did have great skin. I'm just concerned.
I'm a little creeped out though.
Sure what products are there, but
I did think that was just like a name. I didn't realize it was actually snail.
It's organic.
Yeah.
We saw it
It's fine.
being created there.
All right, so Daniel is going to come back later, and we're going to do a special news quiz where he tries to see how much South Korean trivia and knowledge
And we should say the show K Everything premieres tonight, I think, on CNN. Make sure you check that out. All right, coming up here, some of the week's most read stories. You can explore live streaming news and interviews, all of our Bloomberg TV shows, documentaries, reporter analysis, and more. Find all of that in one place. Check out Bloomberg.com/videos to get to that video hub. Much more. Bloomberg This Weekend continues in just a moment here on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio. You can also find us at Bloomberg.com.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend, or BTW.
Wow.
As I'm constantly bullied
10
into
weeks
saying.
in and we're making progress here.
I'm Christina Ruffini.
David Gura alongside Lisa Mateo. This is the moment in the show when Lisa shows us all that she has surfaced over the course of the week. Stories you may have missed. Lisa did not miss these
You may have missed it. I did not, okay? So let's get to the first one. This was actually on the Bloomberg. This is from Bloomberg. So it says, travelers spend big by using astrology as a vacation planner. Okay,
what could go wrong?
Here's the thing. Do you guys follow your signs?
I do not.
You're not too into that? Okay, a
Do
lot
you?
of people are. No.
Okay,
a lot of people are, though, apparently. And a growing number they're turning to, listen to this, astrocartology, okay? So this is when they look at the position of the planets, the moment of your birth. So they're going to locate places in the world that align with achieving your goals. Okay, so a lot of people, like people considering a new chapter in their lives, they want to move, they're looking for love, they're doing all these things. They turn to these folks for some guidance.
You didn't do this,
no, when
Christina,
you moved
before
to New York, you didn't decide.
New job, new chapter.
Although I did once sit through a dinner where a woman, unprompted, brought a book, asked everyone for their birthday, and read for an hour and a half all of our rising sign,
That's a good party
moons,
trick. I like that.
Okay, you can go next time.
Ever get your cards read? Nothing?
No, I don't do any of that stuff.
Oh,
no, I do have a tarot deck. I did a piece once on somebody. I did a piece once on somebody who had a really nice, chill take on it, and they gifted me one afterwards, and it was a nice gift, but I don't use it regularly.
We digress. People are using this. They're actually doing this.
They are, because 30% of American adults say they turn to these horoscopes, tarot cards. Like, so more people are starting to do this, so now they're turning to this new service, and even corporations are hiring these people to bring them on because corporations, they're taking on new ventures, so they want to see if it's in the right location. You gotta read it. It's an interesting read for those of you out there.
All right,
Hannah.
I'm going
to send you a direct message. We're going to talk about this piece, Hannah.
Okay, this next one is from the Wall Street Journal, okay? This is about the boy bands, okay? So the boy band heyday may be over, but the man band era has just begun. Okay, so The boy bands that kind of we loved when we were younger, okay? A lot of them are making big money now because...
Who are we talking about
the
here?
people, we're talking about new kids on the block. Backstreet Boys, right? Remember Boys to Men, New Edition? Like all of those
I love
things.
Boys to Men.
Yes. So they're men now in their 40s and 50s.
They are.
They are. They're not in their 20s and 30s anymore. But they're making money because the women who loved them back in the day now are older. They have more money to spend. So they're going to Vegas to the shows. They're going with girlfriends. They're doing girl trips. My sister actually did one.
Is that right?
She did.
So
Her and her girlfriend.
go.
I did not go. It was her and a girlfriend. Okay. They booked flights. They went out to, I forget where it was, but they had an excellent time. And they had such a phenomenal time. But they are really, really making money off of this, guys. I was a New Kids on the Block, I got to say. That was like my kind of thing. Yeah. And I had 3 younger sisters, so it was always like, who's your favorite? Who's your favorite? So
a girl in my neighborhood had a New Kids on the Block bedspread.
Bedspread. Gosh. But it's a thing. It's a girl's thing. VIP tickets and everything.
You don't want
No, but if you guys want to go, you let me know, and I'll hold down the fort. I'll hold down the fort.
All right, Lisa, we're date. Okay, we're gonna go. That's true. Okay, this one's from the New York Times. Okay, longevity, right? A lot of people are seeking it. This is from the Times. It says the longevity secrets helping athletes blow past the limits of age. Okay, so we're talking about athletes, right? They're extending their careers. Remember, we talked about the Winter Olympics, right? 2 athletes over 40, right? 1 gold medals. Last season, you had 3 40-plus quarterbacks who started NFL games. And then, of course, there's LeBron James, right? He's 41. His son is playing next to him. Little Bronny. Little Bronny. So how they do it, it's more like they're not just sitting in an ice bath. I mean, this is high-tech gadgets. A lot of data involved, like all these sci-fi tech gadgets. And they're doing a lot of different things. A mortal chamber. It's $160,000. It's a human charging station. So some of these athletes are even buying those so they can kind of rejuvenate themselves because they want to extend their career.
Lisa, how much of this is proven? Because I have friends who do a lot of this stuff. Some of it, there's some research to back up, but is it placebo effect for any of this? I don't know.
I mean, they're saying that it's helping because they're continuing.
Something's working,
The thing is that the athletes are making more money, right? So think about it. They make more money. They have more money to spend on a lot of these, gadgets to kind of prolong their career. So,
and the career does end early, relatively speaking.
It does, but
maybe not the rest of your life,
maybe
and
not for so long.
Only so many play-by-play jobs that are available.
That's a good point. All right, I have this one.
One more
from the Washington Post. Okay, so. This was an interesting study. Why sitting all day is so bad for you and what to do about it. So we're sitting here now.
Yes.
And we get up now and then to stand and stretch the back. Sitting is a new smoking. That was like the thing. Remember that?
I remember hearing that, yeah.
Not really. Okay, so apparently the Washington Post, they asked the experts and they said, how much is too much sitting? So if you sit for 8 to 10 hours a day, that's a little too much. You can get up, once in a while. It's tied to higher risk of cancer, right? Type 2 diabetes, this is what the studies show, depression, things like that. And the reason why is because when you sit, right, your muscles are not working and it's affecting your metabolism at the same time. So that's what they say. Your muscles are very important. So you have to remember that when you're just doing that. So that's why I have the standing desk.
Yes, I take your kinesiological counsel all the time, Lisa. I mean, you are
Lisa is aggressively the happiest and healthiest member of our team.
I aspire to do what you're doing. So you do have a stand-up desk.
I have the stand-up desk, and then my watch actually tells me it goes off when I've been sitting for too long.
Does it yell at you?
Yes, it does.
And
it
directs
buzzes
you to stand.
And it tells me it's time to stand. So, yeah.
I have a dog that yells at me. I just use my dog. He just yells at me to get up and take the walks.
You got to take the walk, see?
BTW, by the way, Bloomberg This Weekend, Lisa Mateo with those.
Thank you for the BT dubs.
Thank you very much. We are coming up on 8 o'clock a.m. in New York. And coming up here, our conversation with Nick Burns, the former U.S. ambassador to China, as we look ahead to President Trump's trip to Beijing, scheduled to take place late this coming week, Thursday and Friday, a one-on-one meeting with President Xi Jinping.
High stakes, high diplomatic pressure on that trip. All right, the next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend starts right now.
Coming up on Bloomberg This Weekend, a U.S. fighter jet strikes 2 Iranian flag tankers as the White House waits for Iran's response to a plan to end the war.
They have no military. They have not a lot left. We'll see what happens.
That response was expected last night. The latest from our reporter traveling with the president.
And a team from the CDC is dispatched to the Canary Islands, where they'll meet Americans on a Hantavirus hit cruise ship when they dock tomorrow. What's next as the passengers prepare to quarantine?
Beyonce!
Plus the glitz and glamour of the red carpet at the Met Gala.
The Met actually is one of the biggest and most profound collections of fashion.
A new exhibit from its Costume Institute.
You're the first one to see the new galleries of the Met.
And a private tour with the director of one of the world's most famous museums. Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. It's 8 o'clock in New York. We're coming to you from Bloomberg's Global News headquarters in New York. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini. We are, of course, here with Lisa Mateo, bringing you the latest breaking news, reports, analysis live every morning and every weekend from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Lots to get to. Let's go to Lisa for the headlines.
You got it. And Spanish authorities, they are preparing to receive more than 140 passengers and crew members aboard a cruise ship experiencing a deadly hantavirus outbreak. Now, that ship is making its way to the Canary Islands and is expected to arrive at Tenerife tomorrow. Health officials have said they will perform careful evacuations. The U.S. agreed to send a plane to return more than a dozen Americans who are still on that ship. Now, those passengers, they'll be isolated at the National Quarantine Unit at the University of Nebraska Medical Center and Nebraska Medicine. Angela Hewlett is director of the Biocontainment Unit.
The individuals that we are currently planning on receiving have not been diagnosed with hantavirus. They are asymptomatic, as far as we know. They have no very specific, symptoms that would lead us to be concerned about them actually being infected with hantavirus.
And that virus is a rare family of viruses. It's carried by rodents. 3 passengers have died. In other news, the U.S. still awaiting a response from Iran to its latest proposal to end the war. President Donald Trump, he was asked about it last night as he left for the White House for Virginia.
We'll see what happens. Look, they have no military. They have not a lot left. We'll see what happens.
President Trump's plan proposes that the Islamic Republic reopen the Strait of Hormuz and the U.S. end a blockade on Iranian ports over the next month. Meanwhile, U.S. forces carried out airstrikes on 2 empty Iranian oil tankers. U.S. Central Command said they were trying to break the blockade and enter one of the country's ports. Well, to the U.S. troops in Europe, where sources tell Bloomberg top diplomats from NATO allies there, they anticipate that President Trump will withdraw more forces from the continent, possibly including from Italy. Well, some developments in the Russia-Ukraine war, where President Trump announced a 3-day ceasefire and a prisoner swap between the 2 nations. Yesterday, he was asked if that ceasefire could be extended further.
I mean, it could be. It'd be nice. I'd like to see it stop. Russia-Ukraine, it's the worst thing since World War II in terms of life. 25,000 young soldiers every month. It's crazy. So it could very well be.
That ceasefire would last today through Monday, and it coincides with Russia's Victory Day celebrations to mark the World War II victory over Nazi Germany. Christina and David.
Lisa Mateo, thank you very much. Appreciate those headlines. Well, new clashes in the Strait of Hormuz have strained a month-long ceasefire in the war in Iran as U.S. officials await Iran's response to its latest proposal to end that conflict. Joining us now with the latest is Bloomberg Deputy UAE Bureau Chief Abir Abu Omar. Abir, great to see you once again. Before I get to you, I just want to play a bit of sound here of the Secretary of State. He was meeting with the Pope this week. He traveled to Italy, to Rome, and he talked about the prospects of getting this reply from Iran. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We're expecting a response from them. We'll see what the response entails. The hope is it's something that it can put us into a serious process of negotiation. Their system is still highly fractured and a bit dysfunctional as well. So that may be serving as an impediment. I hope it's a serious offer. I really do.
Abir, that was yesterday. The waiting game continues here. To quote the president, we'll see what happens. What is the latest on the back and forth here between the U.S. and Iran, and what is the expectation that we will get some sort of tangible response here on this Saturday morning?
Yeah, hi again, David. So look, I mean, the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, that's Ismail Baqai, said that what the U.S. has put through the proposal is under review now. He didn't give a timeline for Iranian response. We were expecting that to happen yesterday. That was what President Trump had also said, that the expectation was for a response from the Iranian side to happen on Friday evening. Now, that did not happen. We are keeping an an eye out for the Iranian response to essentially what the U.S. had put through, and just a little bit about the proposal that the U.S. had put through. What is different this time is that the United States is essentially pitching an immediate end to the war and a gradual reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, which is really at the heart of this entire conflict because of a fifth of the world's energy exports that go through it. That's been brought down to a fraction of what it used to be since the start of the war in late February. And essentially after that, Iran and the U.S. would go into another month of negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. Now, just something that is worthy of noting here is that Iran had said previously that the U.S. demands have been quite maximalist, that the U.S. demands have been unrealistic, and sometimes the Iranian side have put them through as saying they were impossible. So we may not see them coming to an agreement on all the 14 clauses that are part of this agreement, but perhaps some agreement on elements of this proposal. And again, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz that had seen some escalations over the past week that had led to a return of hostilities in the Persian Gulf. Yes. I mentioned earlier that the United Arab Emirates saw some attacks earlier this week. So that is something that both countries will have to come to terms with, David.
Thank you very much for that update. We'll come back to you if we get indeed a response from the Iranian. Zabir Abu Omar, Deputy Bureau Chief in the UAE.
This week, President Trump is scheduled to travel to Beijing for high-stakes and highly anticipated summit with President Xi Jinping. The meeting was postponed by Trump because of the war in Iran. That conflict is sure to come up amidst a host of other issues, including trade and AI.
Nicholas Burns was the U.S. ambassador to China during the Biden administration. Now he's a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School, and we talked to him about what's at stake and what both leaders are hoping to achieve next week.
For both the governments, for both leaders, this is the most important relationship they have, the U.S.-China relationship. And they have ambitions for this year. I mean, they want to meet Xi Jinping, Donald Trump, 2 to 3, even 4 times this year. And there's a lot to talk about. I think we'll see a big focus on trade, supply chain, and the commercial relationship.
Do you think it's going to be productive? Do you think there's going to be an actual deliverable coming out of it? Because that takes a lot of groundwork to ensure that happens before the leaders get to that point. And do you think that has been done?
Well, it's an unusual summit in this respect. The person leading the preparations for President Trump is not the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, or the Secretary of Defense. It's the Secretary of the Treasury. And Secretary Bessent has developed, I think, a very effective relationship with the key Chinese interlocutor, and that's Vice Premier He Lifeng, who is both very experienced. He oversees the central bank, the finance ministry, the commerce ministry, but he also has a close personal relationship of 40 plus years with President Xi Jinping. And Secretary Bessent and Vice Premier He Lifeng have been meeting both virtually and together pretty consistently for the last 15 months. And I think their ambition, let's see if they can accomplish this, would be to bring stability to the trade and supply chain relationship. Can they agree to a freeze or a truce on tariffs so that neither side will raise tariffs over the course of this year and hopefully into next year? Can they agree not to have a supply chain war of the type they had in 2025, so a supply chain truce? Can they agree in general, and Secretary Bessent, I think, has been very persuasive about this, that we should not decouple this big trade relationship in goods and services, but we'll have to de-risk in certain dual-use technologies. That, to me, is a very sensible policy. If they can accomplish that and have the Chinese agree to a major buy of American agriculture, soybeans, pork products, fishery products, that will be, I think, a good summit in the economic realm for President Trump.
I want to draw on your experience having participated in some of these leader summits before, and I'm curious what the Chinese hope to get out of this. What have you observed about the way that President Xi approaches meetings like these and his advisors as well?
Well, first, they want no surprises. And what really struck me as I worked on these 3 big summit meetings between 2022 and 2024 for President Biden with President Xi, the Chinese want no surprises. They want everything to be worked out, everything. Strategic, tactical decisions before the 2 leaders walk in the room. They then want the 2 leaders in almost a highly stylized situation flanked by 7 or 8 people on each side to have a conversation about the agreements and about the disagreements, but they don't want haggling at the table between President Xi and his counterpart. So I think that is going to hold true, because that's what the Chinese insisted on when I was working on this relationship. I also think the Chinese want stability with the United States. The Chinese have a number of economic strengths, but they're facing some internal tribulations in the Chinese economy that requires a period of stability. They don't want a sense of crisis with the United States in the immediate year or two ahead. And so I think I'll bet that we'll see some progress on the commercial side. Can they even go further? Could they agree that in addition to our tech firms competing ferociously on AI, who's going to be first mover, first adapter, could they also agree that our countries need to be working together on the worst aspects of AI? For instance, if look at the Mythos model from Anthropic, could cyber terrorists, could cyber criminals get their hands on that very destructive technology? That might argue for the US and China to begin a discussion about how we and the two of us and other countries should be working to balance against those kinds of threats. So in a way, this could be a very important meeting if all of that is discussed.
The backdrop of this, of course, is the war in Iran. China gets 45 to 50% of its crude through the Strait. I'm wondering how involved or not involved in Iran China has been. You've kind of seen them weigh in here and there, but you feel like they're taking a back seat and just kind of watching it play out. There was that great Economist cover with Xi in focus kind of behind Trump, who was shouting, and the cut line was, never get in the way when your enemy is making a mistake. Is that how they're viewing Iran in this conflict?
I think it's a mixed bag. You're right on the one hand that the Chinese have been messaging across the world, we're the stable country. Our leader hasn't invaded anybody. Our leader believes in the global order. You can count on us to be a consistent, reliable partner. That's the Chinese message, juxtaposing Xi Jinping with President Trump and everything that's happened from Venezuela to Greenland to questioning Canadian sovereignty to warring with the NATO allies to the Iran war. And I think that the Chinese have been playing on that and making some hay, particularly in the global south. But on the other hand, I think the Chinese have taken a hit of sorts in their credibility. They did not in any way, shape, or form stand up for Iran in this crisis from February 28th forward. They didn't stand up for Venezuela. They couldn't politically, diplomatically. They obviously couldn't militarily and wouldn't do that. So I think they look a little bit unreliable, because Venezuela and Iran were strategic partners of China. In addition to that, it's very interesting that President Putin has been much more vocal in supporting Iran than President Xi Jinping has. President Putin delivered a personal message of condolence when the Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed on the first day of the war. The Chinese didn't do that. And I think the Chinese have been messaging they don't want to live in the law of the jungle. And that's the hit against the United States. They've also been messaging the Strait of Hormuz needs to open. China depends on that. The global economy does. They've been very worried, the Chinese, about their capital investments and trade with the Gulf Arab states, not just with Iran in terms of energy. So I think the Chinese, like President Trump, want to see some kind of agreement with Iran to open the strait to commercial traffic where Iran's not the tollkeeper.
I'm sure you've seen the photograph of the Iranian foreign minister and the Chinese foreign minister meeting in Beijing in recent days. And I'm curious what message you think that sends. There was this back and forth about a potential one-page memo of understanding between the U.S. and Iran. And I noted that Iran thanked the Chinese for their 4-point proposal. Are they stepping up to play a bigger role here in trying to resolve the conflict in the Middle East?
I don't think they want to be the middleman, but they want an agreement and they want the war to end and the strait to open and energy to flow. I also thought that Foreign Minister Wang Yi, a very experienced diplomat, was sending two messages when Foreign Minister Araghchi of Iran came to see him a couple of days ago in Beijing. Message number one, of course, China supports Iran. They're strategic partners. China does not support what the U.S. and Israel have done in beginning this war back on the 28th of February. But on the other hand, I thought there were some subtle messages from the Chinese during the Araghchi visit. You need to negotiate seriously. We think there should be serious negotiations to enable the ceasefire to come about. They haven't really focused on the nuclear issue of the highly enriched uranium, but they've been laser focused, the Chinese, on the strait. The Chinese, when they think of power and they think of their global power, they always think trade, economics, manufacturing, exports, free flow of goods first, because that sustains this huge manufacturing export-led economy that is giving China the little growth that it has now.
Before we let you go, I do want to ask you about Taiwan. This American president hasn't been very vocal on that issue, and some Taiwan supporters are concerned that that might be something he'd be willing to negotiate away in the room to pursue some of those other goals, or not negotiate away, but not send strong signals that America will have Taiwan's back in case of a Chinese invasion. Do you think this president will militarily support Taiwan if that happens? And are you concerned what happens with that issue at this summit?
It's very clear the Chinese want to push President Trump on Taiwan. Foreign Minister Wang Yi came out and said that after a phone call with Secretary Rubio a couple of days ago, that Taiwan is going to be the red line issue, that the United States should not cross Chinese red lines. That's a very familiar statement to me. They made that statement to me hundreds of times. And it's important that President Trump, I think, do two things. Number one, honor the Taiwan Relations Act, law of the land in the United States. We have to supply Taiwan with defensive military technology. And we have never, over 50 years, negotiated those military sales with the Chinese in Beijing. And there was a beginning of that when President Trump and President Xi had a discussion about that a couple of months ago. I think that's a dangerous area. Number two, we should put the pressure on the Chinese government. They're the ones that are threatening to invade Taiwan. They're the ones who have simulated blockades, military blockades of Taiwan Island. And the rest of the world does not want to see a war. They don't want to see the Taiwan Strait closed, consider the impact on the global economy. So I think we should be on the offensive, warning the Chinese government to be more reasonable, to meet with the Taiwan leadership, which they haven't done for 10 years, and kind of turn the tables on President Xi and on his team. I think Taiwan will definitely be on the Chinese agenda for this meeting, and I hope President Trump will maintain our 50-year one China policy, where we fulfill these military obligations, defensive sales of technology to the Taiwan authorities.
It's Ambassador Nicholas Burns. Appreciate his time. Coming up, a major change that could affect every public company in the U.S., what the SEC is considering. We'll talk with the former chair of the SEC, Gary Gensler, who joins us here in New York. That is straight ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend, on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, and at Bloomberg.com.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on today's top stories. And we'll start with Frontier Airlines. They say one of its planes struck a pedestrian on the runway, leaving Denver International Airport last night. Now, it forced the pilots to abort the takeoff as smoke filled the cabin. The aircraft, it was carrying 224 passengers and 7 crew members. No word on the condition of the person who was hit by that plane. And a national redistricting battle over U.S. House seats has swung toward Republicans. A Virginia court invalidated a Democratic gerrymandering effort, and Republicans in Alabama, well, they approved plans for a new primary elections if courts allow GOP-drawn House districts to be used in the November midterm elections. Protesters, well, protests took place at the Alabama State House. Republican lawmakers in Louisiana and South Carolina, they also face opposition as they presented plans yesterday to redraw their congressional districts. The U.S. military struck another alleged drug trafficking boat. It took place in the eastern Pacific Ocean. 2 men were killed, 1 survived. U.S. Southern Command said it immediately notified the U.S. Coast Guard to activate the search and rescue system for that survivor. And the Pentagon has started releasing hundreds more declassified files linked to decades of UFO sightings. And they say the move allows Americans to study material and decide for themselves if aliens are real. It's part of a push from the Trump administration to provide more transparency to the public. David and Christina.
Christina, decide for yourself.
We need that big X-Files poster. I want to believe with a little UFO. All right. Thanks, Lisa. Public companies in the U.S. are required to report earnings every quarter, but that could change. This week, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission unveiled a new proposal that would require companies to report earnings semi-annually. That's just twice a year.
The current SEC chair, Paul Atkins, said the proposed change would, quote, provide companies with increased regulatory flexibility. critics say less frequent reporting could heighten the risk of insider trading. Joining us now on set is a former chair of the SEC, Gary Gensler, now a professor at MIT, and the co-host of a podcast called Power and Consequences. I'll ask you plainly first, is this a good idea? Is the move away from quarterly reporting to semi-annual reporting a good idea?
No, I think this is really a solution in search of a problem. I think transparency is really important in our capital markets. You just had a report about transparency about UFOs. This is a little bit different. But we've been doing this actually for a very long time. And I think it's part of why our American capital markets are so good. Investors, people watching this show, or the big investors that maybe don't watch on Saturday morning.
We hope they will.
They get that information on a quarterly basis. And so it's more timely. And what studies, economic study after economic study has shown that that's a good thing. That creates a market environment where you can get a little higher price earnings ratio and a little less cost of capital because your investor base knows what's going on.
What do you say to the CEOs who complain that this is onerous and too much of their life is taken up having to prepare for these earnings releases and earnings calls?
And is that who's pushing for this? That's my question,
I think
who
in
wants
part.
this? Yeah.
You know, it's really interesting, like who really is looking for this? In President Trump's first term, which we'll call Trump 45,
okay,
he also called for this, and his then SEC chair, Jay Clayton, did some public roundtables, put out what's called a concept release, and then didn't do it. And I think maybe the president, even though I think he still likes Jay Clayton,
Is he U.S. attorney here in New York?
He is, but he may have felt a little slow-walked on that. And Trump 47 has come back. And so I think the president really wants it, but I really don't think the capital markets want it.
Does this make insider trading and malfeasance easier to conceal if you don't have to report quite as regularly?
It's just a little bit easier. I want to caution, like, every 6 months putting out information means that our markets will be a little bit more volatile, those earnings releases, and this is a voluntary system. So it's interesting what the SEC is saying. They're saying, we just want to make flexibility the root of all of this. And there's a great study in the 1960s. The individual went on to get a Nobel Prize, George Akerlof, who is Janet Yellen's husband.
Yes.
Yes. And George wrote about the problem with lemons, and he was talking about the used car market.
Okay.
And he said the problem is if you don't have enough information, you don't know which cars are the lemons, and thus it lowers the pricing of even the good cars. And so put that in the stock market. If you let it be flexible, the lemons might not report, but you don't know who the lemons are, and so it might lower the valuation in the overall markets.
Interesting.
Just a question about the mechanics of this. So we have this proposal, 60-day period in which the public can comment. You've lived through many of these, both at the CFTC and the SEC. What happens at the end of that comment period? Where are we in this process?
Well, the staff pulls together all the comments, puts together a lot of things for the commissioners. There's only 3 Republican commissioners now, and makes a recommendation. Generally speaking, from this time to finalizing a rule, it takes anywhere from 18 to, I'd say, 30 months. But with the clock ticking on the Trump administration, this agency might decide to move forward within that time frame. I think it's up to investors. I think it's up to listeners of this program to say, small investors, large investors, academics, news organizations say, no, quarterly reporting is what we need. And then really the key is, do some companies, some issuers say, you know, we should do this anyway. You know, before the SEC actually made it mandatory in 1970, the New York Stock Exchange in 1926 said we should move to quarterly reporting. This is a 100-year-ago thing. And by the early 1950s, 90% of companies were doing it.
But to all the points you just made, is this a fait accompli, or do you think there's room for them to change their mind on this decision?
I think there's a public comment period, and it really is important, whether it's the media, and especially large companies, investors, and so forth, who might get in the ear of this White House.
Another question about disclosures, and we're going to watch you deftly dodge the question that I put to you here, but
No,
I'm going to give it a
David,
shot anyway. We had
Hang on, I'm going to get comfortable. Okay, go for it.
We have Elon Musk agreeing to a $1.5 million settlement with the SEC over the fact that he didn't disclose the position that he'd taken in Twitter before he bought the company in a timely fashion. That now goes before a judge this week, which I gather is customary. A judge can say, I want to hear out the reasons for coming to this settlement. Your reaction to that, I should say you were at the SEC when this issue came about.
Well, and you wanted me to get up and dance because, look, I ran a civil law enforcement agency, so I can't comment on any individual thing that we worked on, but it's about transparency. And Congress in the 1960s came together. There was a Senator Williams from New Jersey, the Williams Act, and said, we need disclosure about when somebody's accumulating shares in a company. If you accumulate over 5%,
which Mr. Musk did,
then you need to report to the public that you have some intent to control. And I'm proud that when I was chair of the SEC, we shortened that time period from 10 days to 5 days, because that's really material, non-public information that there's somebody accumulating. And what happens generally when it's announced, the stock pops. And so Christina talked about insider trading. What happens in those 5 days until it's announced? And who knows about it? Which lawyers know about it? What insiders, not insiders in the company now, insiders in the acquirer. So that's a really important thing. This is not just a small little traffic violation. That transparency in the markets really helps the public.
But how is the enforcement of that? Is it robust, or is it hard to enforce a lot of these rules, this one in particular?
Well, it first comes from a little backbone from the administration. The cop on the beat matters. And if the cop on the beat enforces and says, and the law on this is not an intent law. It's what lawyers call per se. It's just like, you've gone too long, that's a violation. I don't know. It's just sort of straightforward stuff.
I want to pivot to the summit that's coming up this week. President Trump going to Beijing to meet with President Xi. We were talking with Ambassador Burns about the work that he did laying the groundwork for the 3 summits that President Biden had with the Chinese president. You also were involved in these issues when you were at the SEC. We have seen over the last few weeks the Chinese administration really pushing back on foreign investment in Chinese tech companies in particular. Would love to get your sense of where things stand. They have been so reliant on Western capital for so long now. Is it worrisome? Should it be worrisome to capital markets now that we see this kind of prohibition in place by the Chinese government?
I did work closely with Nick, and we worked with the Chinese, and we successfully got the Chinese to agree that their companies here in the U.S., the Chinese companies in the U.S., would comply with our laws. And for 20 years previously, folks weren't successful. So thank you, Nick Burns. We were proud to do that as well. And I think that was good. That's good for the U.S. capital markets that we kept those companies here, because we're like half the world's capital markets. And back to our earlier point, I don't want to adopt the European approach. That capital markets has semi-annual reporting. It's not as good. But in terms of what's happening this week, for those of you who don't want to listen to Simon & Johnson and I do have an episode coming out Monday on China.
Shameless tease, I like that.
Yeah, shameless tease on power and consequences. But my thought is on the table is the Chinese do want to get a little bit loosening on Taiwan. Nick talked about that. The president wants to have some deliverables and announceables maybe on soybeans and other things for, it's an election year for the Farm Belt. And then business community wants a sort of a lowering of the tension on trade and tariffs. And there will be real questions. Will the president give President Xi something on Taiwan? They're already holding up a military sale of about $11 billion. And Nick would like to have that continue. But it would be really interesting what happens there. And I think China is stronger today than they were 18 months ago. I think the war in Iran has strengthened China. And China now seems like, well, there may be an alternative to the U.S. Now, how that plays out in the capital markets, of course, if they don't settle things down this week or kick the ball down the field, which I think that's what President Trump wants to do electorally, kick the ball down the field, then capital markets might fall off.
We're short on time. Before I let you go, I do want to ask you about oil, which you talked about almost the whole time you were here last time. So we only have one oil question. But we saw Brent crude plunged nearly $10 a barrel early on Wednesday after you had this report that the U.S. and Iran were nearing an agreement. And about an hour before that was published, traders exchanged $700 million in oil futures, raising suspicions of possible insider information. The reporter for Axios, Barak Ravid, of course, was forcefully denying those allegations. Why is this something the government is watching so closely?
Well, look, there's a real challenge around protecting markets, the integrity of markets against insider trading. And over again, we've seen it this year, these happenings where somebody gets into a market, maybe they're going into Polymarket or Kalshi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But here, sometimes it's even going into the oil futures markets. I think the oil futures markets are better supervised than the Kalshis and Polymarket. And so that's going to have to play out. I definitely think that Congress should pass some laws that the government actors can't trade in these prediction markets.
Gary Gensler, great to see you. Thank you for coming in. Again, the podcast is Power and Consequences. He co-hosts it with Simon Johnson, the Nobel laureate, also at MIT. Gary Gensler and he both at MIT as professors. Appreciate your time. Appreciate the round-the-world tour that we got there for Friday.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gary. That was great.
Well, coming up, we're going to speak with California Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna. He's right now on a swing through the Midwest. We're going to ask him also about President Trump's trip to China and Democrats' chances of retaking the House this fall.
Coming up, it's one of the fanciest parties in the world, the Met Gala, and we got a sneak peek.
And our conversation with the director and CEO of the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on today's top stories. And Peter Magyar will be sworn in as Hungary's next prime minister today, marking an official end to Viktor Orban's 16-year rule. And Magyar is a former Orban insider and has vowed to tackle corruption and unlock frozen European Union funds to boost Hungary's economy. He promises to repair ties with the EU and restore Hungary's place among Western democracies as early as the end of this decade. The New York Stock Exchange is reportedly set to open a private members club on Wall Street. Now, sources tell the Financial Times the invite-only club, it'll be located in a renovated vault that formerly housed stock certificates with plans to open this summer. To sports now, and the PGA Tour holding two events this weekend as the Truist Championship at Quail Hollow Club in Charlotte, North Carolina. Sungjae Im, he tops the leaderboard at 9 under par, and at the One Flight Myrtle Beach Classic in South Carolina, Aaron Rai takes the lead over Brandt Snedeker and Mark Hubbard. Hope I did it justice. And in the NBA playoffs, the Knicks, they are up 3 games to none against the Philadelphia 76ers. New York, they're going to have their chance to take the series tomorrow afternoon. We shall see. The Pistons, though, and the Cavaliers, as well as the Thunder and the Lakers, play Game 3 today. David and Christina, I thought this is interesting. I told you earlier,
yes,
the 76ers bought 500 tickets that they donated, for those 2 home games because they didn't want Knicks fans buying
but
those.
They came.
That's so shady.
There were a lot of Knicks fans in the house last night, and it was a raucous atmosphere. I think it was hard game to officiate. Yes. I think there was a lot of. Anyway, do you watch the game?
No, but I knew you guys were.
I just wanted to. I had to.
You
ask.
said you were watching it with.
Yeah, I watched the whole thing.
Yeah.
I knew that the show was in your capable hands, and I could just stay up till 10:15 watching it. It was excellent.
Really late Friday night there.
Late Friday night for me. All
Thanks,
right.
Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. The first Monday in May for a certain set means only one thing, the Met Gala. And love it or love to hate it, fashion's Hunger Games are never without controversy. And this year, the presence of co-sponsors, Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez Bezos, prompted calls for a boycott, with attendees paying 6 figures for a seat at one of the exclusive tables at a time when many Americans are struggling to put food on theirs. Critics say the event's lavish displays of fashion excess cast an unflattering light on anyone ascending those famous steps.
That's right. But what often gets lost in the discourse is that the Met Gala is the museum's biggest annual fundraiser. This year, raising $42 million to help pay for exhibits, pay curators, and preserve paintings, sculptures, and one of the largest fashion archives in the world. Bloomberg was the first to see the new exhibit and the new gallery. We got a private tour of the Met with its director and CEO at a time when arts and arts funding are more important, he says, than ever.
We love you. Oh my gosh! Beyonce!
Sam, is this Erte? Is it Erte?
Before the couture and the chaos,
it is always a very exciting moment. It's a big celebration for creativity, for the arts, for fashion, for New York City, and certainly also for the museum.
Met Director Max Hollein met us on a Wednesday in a closed museum to show us what they've been working on.
What is the lead time to developing an exhibit like this? Is it year by year, or are you looking many years ahead?
So it took us 8 years to get this show together. It wasn't that we were thinking about 8 years, how do we do it, but really to get all these important loans to one place, that's really the challenge. So the preparation for these shows usually take more like, 2 years. And importantly about this exhibition, it's only Met collection. So
you don't have any loans, this is all your in-house?
No, it's all from the Met's collection. The Met actually is one of the biggest and most profound collections of fashion. So we have 37,000 garments here. Fashion is not only one of the really complex ways of expressing human creativity, it's also something that basically is so attuned to the current time, but it is also something very difficult to collect.
It's very perishable, right?
It's perishable, it takes up a lot of space. The Met Gala provides the funds that are necessary to run a department, to run a collection, really also ample service of preservation of fashion history for our communities.
Can we go take a look?
Please, come.
Like everywhere in Manhattan, real estate is at a premium. The museum can't expand anymore into Central Park, so it has to find creative ways to carve out new gallery space within the pre-existing footprint.
This was the retail store.
This is the gift shop.
Yeah, this was the gift shop. So now enter through the gift shop, but we actually changed the gift shop into grand exhibition galleries. You're the first ones to see the new galleries of the Met. These are all objects from the Met's collection. It's a show that's like a manifesto. It's called Costume Art. And what it tells you is the story of the importance of the dressed body, of fashion in art history. So on the one hand, you see fantastic costumes, but on the other hand, you also see how all the other artworks in our museum, and how on the other hand also other art influences fashion and vice versa.
But fashion can also be kind of political, right?
Of course, it's always also a statement of expression, of power. Fashion is so fascinating because it's probably the art form that kind of responds so immediately to our current time.
I imagine it's unique in that you have curators from different expertises working together in a way that they probably wouldn't otherwise, that you would have.
We have 140 curators working here. Everyone is very specialized in their area. And so we need to create more opportunities for them and for our different areas to be in dialogue, in conversation. We want to have one inspire the other.
David, this is menswear. Yes, you could wear that on set.
Well, you should take inspiration of this. Not only what you want to look at, tailor, but yes, what you need to wear, right?
I'm going to push him sartorially, and I'm going to tell him it's art, so he has to do it.
But the Costume Institute is only a small piece of the bigger picture. After struggling to survive COVID and the resulting hit to both patrons and patronage, last year the Met had its highest attendance since 2019.
And we have 6.3 million visitors a year. Wow. We are currently undergoing a total kind of overhaul of about a quarter of our entire gallery system.
You're the director, you're the CEO as well, and I'm curious, when it comes to benefactors, is there more reluctance now because of the broader cultural undertones that we have, or
just the economy?
Yeah, are people less willing to give or to engage?
So we've seen quite the opposite. I think you see this museum being enormously supported, of course, by philanthropy. So I think that there are various ways that this museum serves its audiences, its communities, and I think broader purposes that we all care about, no matter where you are on the political spectrum.
That means investing $1.5 billion over the next decade, building out new galleries and exhibits to be more inclusive across genres, geography, and time.
It is very important to not have, so to say, only Greek and Roman and European front and center, but really apply the same care, apply the same grandeur, the same rigor to also all the other areas.
Placing a bust from northern Pakistan next to an old European master, and displaying a Congolese power figure not as an ethnographic artifact, but as a significant work unto itself.
I think it's also important to see that we sometimes walk through these galleries and think that this is like archaeology, but a lot of this is contemporary art.
Can you just speak to what you have in store with the museum here over the next decade or so?
So we We reopened the European Paintings Galleries. We reopened the Rockefeller Wing just last year. We will open the new Costume Institute Galleries in a couple of days. Yes. Next year, we will reopen our ancient West Asia galleries, and then also our new wing for modern and contemporary art. That alone is a massive project, construction of about $600 million.
Is the new footprint of the museum, are you trying to get people to have those conversations in real time as they move through the museum?
That's exactly right. So the whole museum becomes in that way more fluid. We really show how, in that sense, African art is so connected to European art in that context, etc.
Who are those who are coming to the Met Museum in the year 2026?
Our average age currently is 35. We have people from the very young age to the end of their life, but it basically shows you the diversity of our audience, and our local visitorship is enormously strong. And then, of course, domestic and international tourism.
Last Monday's gala raised $42 million to help fund not just the Costume Institute, but museum programming and activities for all its visitors, no matter what they wear.
Why was now a good time for a statement about the importance of fashion?
I think that fashion has been part of the Met's history and the Met's institution for such a long time. It responds very quickly to what's going on in the world, how contemporary culture feels these days. So it's actually sometimes faster and more immediate than painting, sculpture, drawing, and I love that.
Max Hollein with a little ensemble there.
I loved it too. That's his wife Nina who made her dress, and it was also pretty cool.
Eric, we saw how busy that museum was on a normal day. For us to have it all to ourselves was pretty.
It's really cool. We got to find some more stuff to do. All right, coming up, actor-producer Daniel Dae Kim is back with a special Saturday quiz segment.
And ahead in our 9 o'clock hour, the latest on that luxury cruise ship docked off the coast of West Africa. That's coming up. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Gura with Christina Ruffini. And earlier we spoke with Daniel Dae Kim about his new docuseries, K-Everything, looking at the fast-growing popularity of K-pop culture.
Daniel thought it would be fun to quiz us on our Korean cultural knowledge. So we did subject ourselves to that embarrassment, but he did a great job. Take a listen.
And I know you do this every week, so...
You're our first guest quizmaster.
Oh, I'm honored. And I actually, because I know the format, I prepared questions in certain categories, which are finance, sports, music, and food.
All under the aegis of Korean culture.
That's right. Everything has to do with something Korean.
I have faith in moderate faith in my ability.
I just have to. You haven't seen these questions, Christina.
No,
right? I feel
why
like
do you think we're colluding?
Sometimes because I lose so frequently, I worry that you do see the questions in advance. But
I'm rooting for you, David.
Thank
just
you very
so
much,
you know.
Dan. I
All right,
appreciate that.
here we go.
All right,
ready? Here we go. First question. South Korean stocks just registered their second best month ever, overtaking which country's stock market to become the world's 8th largest?
Wow. Okay. I'm really just going to guess. Are you guessing as well?
Yes, but it's a multi-part. Exactly.
Okay. All right. I wrote Japan.
It was Canada today, but it was the UK last week.
Wow, it's oddly specific in a way that...
It is oddly specific and very correct, Christina Ruffini.
I feel like this is rigged.
It is the UK.
Did you not?
No.
Like, I literally Googled Korean news, and this was the first thing that came up.
I didn't Google
so you studied is what you're saying. All right, okay.
Yes.
All right.
It says a lot about us
Cheating
as
and studying are two different things.
The Cosby overtook the UK last week.
And then Canada today, it's now above both of them.
See, I didn't even know that.
Wow, we all learned something, often from you.
That's right. Our guide to Korea, Christina Ruffini.
All right. What's the next question?
Next question. Sports.
Sports, okay.
All right.
Definitely her strong suit, as we've all learned.
Sports ball. I'm really good at sports ball. Lay it on me.
Korean professional athlete Son Heung-min signed a $26 million transfer fee to make his debut for which American city's sports team?
Okay. I feel like I'm just
I have absolutely no idea.
Grabbing at what metropolitan area can I think of right now? All right, Los Angeles.
Yankees?
That's not a city.
Oh my God, you said a sports team. All right, New York.
Well, all right. So, David, you're correct.
Oh my gosh!
It is Los Angeles, but I'll give you. I'll give you a bonus point if you can tell me without looking at the monitor here, without looking at the screen.
I won't look.
What sport?
I was going to say baseball, but that's not right.
Soccer. Right there. Son Heung-min.
All right.
Oh.
Or as the players call him, Sonny.
Sonny.
Mm-hmm.
All
Your
right.
women's team, the South Korean women's team is always really good.
Yeah, they are.
Every Olympics.
Mhm.
It's like one of the big challengers.
Dropping some knowledge, Mr. Finney. She's
Wow.
flexing.
That's
Now
all I
who's
got.
flexing?
That's all right.
All
You know what? I don't like this. You two, don't bond. Don't bond.
All right.
All right, onward.
All right, so it's tied 1-1.
1-1.
All right.
I'm going to put a little marker around right here.
Yeah.
The next category is music.
Music.
All right, I'll even be a little more specific, K-pop.
Okay.
Okay?
Suspected we might go here.
World superstars BTS just made a huge comeback after 4 years being out of the spotlight. What do they call their dedicated fan base?
Oh.
The BTS
I do know
blank.
this. God, it's like this, but it's not. Oh. Okay.
Okay.
What do we got?
I wrote the BTSers.
I wrote Mob originally, and then I changed it to Army.
Army.
Oh, it's Mob. No, no kidding. It is Army. That is correct.
Oh my gosh.
That is correct.
I love it. Okay.
Does your daughter not K-pop?
No, I mean they love K-pop Demon Hunters, and I've heard the soundtrack many a time.
8,000 times.
They'll be thrilled to hear that.
BTS.
You know he's in that, yeah.
It sounds very
sounds
50s.
very
Yeah,
50s.
like doo-wop. All right.
I'll trademark it after the show.
Okay. All right. Ruffini 2.
2-1.
All right.
Could be a peaceable tie.
Just
All right. Now,
circle my score up here in case.
the good news is I think this is the easiest question.
Oh, good.
All right.
I'm ready. It's food.
All right. Here we go. Food.
Yeah.
What Korean food, in addition to being super tasty, was recently found to help eliminate nanoplastics in the body?
Okay. I feel like this is pretty easy. And I wrote kimchi.
Kimchi?
Kimchi is correct.
Really?
Yes, it was recently found
fermented.
So not only is it a probiotic, not only have studies found it to improve immune response, but recently there was a study that said it can flush nanoplastics out of your body.
Which we're all worried about now.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
I
So
love that.
yeah. So but you both got it right. So it's Ruffini 3.
3-2.
David
No,
2.
Yeah.
You know, but David got the sports question, so that's maybe 1.5.
Almost thank you for coming in.
right, there you
Always
go.
nice to see you.
Congratulations. Congratulations to the champ.
Thank you. And congrats to you on the series. It's really great. I highly recommend it. And thanks for being our first guest quizmaster.
Good to see you guys.
All right, come back soon.
See if we do more of that. I mean, I'd like to win, so maybe I'll pick the next. This is like a friend of yours. You've known him for a long time. I should say.
We did not collude.
You're not
I
close
resent
friends, but
the implication that I am cheating on these quizzes.
She just studies.
Yeah,
I mean,
she just studies.
I felt like he was very charismatic and a great guy.
Yeah, he's really fun. He's an actor.
And that comes
he's an
across in the
actress.
series. I don't mean to keep hawking the series, but he's, navigating the wilds of K-beauty and all the like, but he's, it's a great window into
That's.
that
I mean,
world.
he literally could do our jobs. He's very good at talking to all people. It's very annoying.
And maybe game show host
Yes,
coming
as well.
soon.
Lisa, you're gonna have to play with us next time. I feel like it's only fair. You got to come join this side of the Trump.
I'll tell the bosses the next time I'm out of town, maybe they can slot him in.
This is my new co-anchor.
His day rate, I'm sure, is very reasonable. And
No problem. No problem. Although you've been teasing me so badly this morning, I think I'd take a potted plant.
there
but
you
it's
go.
fine.
Our thanks to Daniel Dae Kim for all of that, for the interview about the show, and
Very good
his latest
sport.
work, and then that game as well. A lot of serious news this morning as well. Focused on the Middle East, waiting on that response from the Iranians to that U.S. proposal. We are coming up at 9 a.m. in New York. Joining us live in our next hour is Democratic Congressman Khanna of California. He's a member of the House Armed Services and Oversight Committee. Should also say he's on the Select Committee on the CCP, so we'll talk about President's China visit as well. Bloomberg This Weekend continues on TV and radio right now. Coming up on Bloomberg This Weekend, a U.S. fighter jet strikes 2 Iranian-flagged tankers as the White House waits for Iran's response to a plan to end the war.
They have no military. They have not a lot left. We'll see what happens.
That response was expected last night. The latest from our reporter traveling with the president.
And a team from the CDC is dispatched to the Canary Islands, where they'll meet Americans on a Hantavirus-hit cruise ship when they dock tomorrow. What's next as the passengers prepare to quarantine?
Plus, as the president prepares to go to China, Congressman Khanna heads to the Rust Belt.
We saw Chinese steel here in Cleveland's Ford Drive.
We'll talk to the California Democrat about how American manufacturers can compete.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. We are coming to you live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York. I'm Christina Ruffini.
And I'm David Gura with Lisa Mateo on this, the 9th of May. It is a Saturday. A lot happening in the Middle East. We are waiting to see what the response is from the Iranians to a proposal the U.S. has advanced. I should also say we have the ceasefire in Ukraine over the next few days as well, tracking all of that. And, of course, what's happening with this ship. Where there have been
We're waiting on news for this
cruise
ship and whether or not the Americans who are on that ship are going to have to quarantine, what that looks like. We'll have some expertise coming up to try to walk us through what's going on with all that. But first, let's go to Lisa with the headlines.
Yeah, let's start with that cruise ship that's experiencing a deadly hantavirus outbreak. It's making its way to the Canary Islands. Now, it's expected to arrive at Tenerife tomorrow. Spanish authorities, they're preparing to receive more than 140 passengers and crew members, where health officials have said they will perform careful evacuations. The U.S. agreed to send a plane to return more than a dozen Americans who are still on that ship. Now, those passengers, they'll be isolated at the National Quarantine Unit at the University of Nebraska Medical Center and Nebraska Medicine. Michael Wadman is director of the unit.
There are 20 spaces in the quarantine unit, and we're making preparations to receive the 19 passengers, the U.S. citizens who will be repatriated. The quarantine unit enjoys an outstanding facility that's designed to limit spread of the pathogen that we're monitoring for. All of these passengers will be monitored for symptoms. They're all well at this time and will be coming to us for monitoring.
Hantavirus is a rare family of viruses carried by rodents. 3 passengers have died. Well, in other news, the U.S. is still awaiting a response from Iran to its latest proposal to end the war. President Donald Trump was asked about it last night.
We'll see what happens. Look, they have no military. They have not a lot left. We'll see what happens.
President Trump's plan proposes that the Islamic Republic reopen the Strait of Hormuz and the U.S. end a blockade on Iranian ports over the next month. Right now, let's take you to the Russia-Ukraine war. President Trump announced a 3-day ceasefire and prisoner swap that was between the two nations.
And they also agreed to give 1,000 on each side, 1,000 prisoners back. So they're going to be transferring almost immediately 1,000 prisoners from each side. That's very good. Russia, Ukraine.
That ceasefire would last today through Monday and coincides with Russia's Victory Day celebrations to mark the World War II victory over Nazi Germany. Ukraine has intensified strikes on Russia in recent months, regularly hitting locations just deeper inside the country. And a volcanic eruption on a remote Indonesian island has killed 3 hikers and injured 5. They were climbing in a restricted area. About 20 climbers had set out to ascend Mount Dukono despite those safety restrictions. David and Christina.
Lisa, thank you very much. Lisa Mateo with an update of those headlines. And the UK is announcing it will deploy one of its warships to the Middle East for a European-led mission to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz once there is a stable ceasefire in place. This coming as dramatic new pictures from CENTCOM released overnight show flames and large plumes of smoke after a U.S. fighter jet disabled 2 Iran-flagged tankers, which it says were violating the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports.
President Donald Trump has warned America could escalate its military posture in the Strait as Iran weighs a new proposal from the U.S. to end the war. Back with us now is Bloomberg News White House correspondent Jeff Mason. Jeff, where do you think this stands on this? Do we have any updates on whether each side has gotten a response from the other? And is there a fear that the president will be leaving this conflict without fully securing the strait? I guess that's good news for the president. He's likely to be happy. That news from the UK that they are sending some resources down there. But where does this leave the strait overall if the U.S. doesn't fully secure it before and trying to end this conflict?
Well, the UK angle is definitely interesting, given the pressure that President Trump has put on the UK Prime Minister and the very really positive state visit that he had from King Charles. But to your initial question, Christina, still no updates on whether or not Iran has responded yet to the latest offer from the United States. And in addition to the broad question that you asked about whether that may lead to the president leaving this conflict without a few major things resolved, including the Strait of Hormuz and whether or not Iran has the ability to create a nuclear weapon. In the short term, those are more longer term issues. In the short term, it also raises a question of where will the conflict stand as he leaves this country on Tuesday for China. The president has a big trip to Beijing next week, and this issue is hanging over that visit in the same way that it's hung over a lot of the president's relationships with other countries and other leaders around the world.
Jeff, let's talk a bit about that visit. I know you're going to be on the plane with the president heading over there for that summit. This is one that was postponed. I think it was supposed to take place back in March. Of course, it was postponed because of the start of this war. It hasn't ended. In Bloomberg reporting this week, there's some unease or dissatisfaction among the Chinese that this conflict is still roiling in the Middle East while this summit is going to take place. We spoke with Ambassador Nicholas Burns, who is President Biden's ambassador to China. Talked to Gary Gensler, the former head of the SEC, about the work that they did during the previous administration to kind of reintegrate ties with China. What are the broad objectives that President Trump has going into that meeting, aside from just sitting down face to face and, I guess, keeping alive that human connection between the leaders of the two largest economies in the world?
Well, that last one that you said is actually a pretty big one. Just keeping the relationship open, keeping the ties and conversations going. But there certainly are some other ideas or other hopes that the president wants to achieve during that trip, including perhaps extending a trade truce that has been in place for a little bit between China and the United States, talking about tariffs on both sides, also talking about fentanyl. The president has pressed China to reduce the amount of fentanyl that is coming out of its country and into the United States. That's something that they had previously agreed on, but that the United States does not feel China is really following up on. But then to circle back to the perennial topic of Iran, that is no doubt also likely to come up when the two leaders meet in Beijing, in part because, as you rightly said, Beijing is not happy that this war is going on. Beijing is a big client of Iran for Iranian oil. That, on the other hand, has created tensions between China and the United States because the U.S. is upset that they're taking that oil and sort of undercutting the blockade that the United States is putting on Iranian ports to try to squeeze Iran's economy to push them not just to come to the table, but to agree to a peace deal.
Christina, I want to pick up on this because we were talking with Ambassador Burns about this, obviously the meeting that took place between the foreign minister of China and Iran. But something else that the ambassador said stood out to me, and that is he sees this as the beginning of a sequence of meetings that we're going to see here. And indeed, during the Biden administration, there were three summits.
He seems fairly bullish on this. Yeah, sorry, continue.
No. And I thought that was so fascinating. We're focused on this meeting taking place, but he seemed quite optimistic that this would lead to additional summits here down the road. Anyways, just wanted to note that.
Jeff, I mean, what is your take? Is there a plan for more after this, or do they have to see how well this one goes? And then, of course, before we let you go, the other lingering issue is Taiwan and whether or not the president will be more willing to be pushed on Taiwan, or even just not stating strongly U.S. support for Taiwan could be taken as a signal by the Chinese.
Absolutely. So to those 2 points, number one, yes, there are more meetings planned this year between President Xi and President Trump. And I heard at least some former officials say that's one reason why the list of deliverables, which is very Washington speak, is not super high for this summit, in part because they have to leave some for other meetings later in the year. That's another reason why this one wasn't delayed, I was told, in part because of the calendar. If they delay this one-on-one meeting, it doesn't leave a whole lot of room for the other two or three meetings that are expected between the two leaders later this year at summits and perhaps a Xi visit or visit by President Xi to the United States. To your last question on Taiwan, that is absolutely also hanging in the air over this visit. There are some former government officials who I've heard say in the last week as I was preparing for this trip, they're concerned that President Trump is in a mood or in a position to really soften the U.S. Take on Taiwan, and that President Xi is going to try to use this opportunity to get him to soften that, perhaps get him to say something or commit to delivering fewer arms from the United States to Taiwan, and that would potentially dramatically change the position of the United States and Taiwan and change that whole relationship with China. It's definitely something that President Xi wants to see.
All right, Jeff Mason, traveling with the president today, our White House correspondent. Thank you, as always, for joining us.
Pivot to another major story now. Health experts across the globe tracking down and monitoring passengers who were on board a cruise ship hit by Hantavirus. Right now, the ship is off the coast of West Africa, set to dock early tomorrow morning. There are 17 Americans on board that vessel.
That's right. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has sent a team to meet them after 6 cases have been confirmed with 2 more probables. That includes 3 people who died. Now, once passengers get on dry land, those Americans will be flown to Nebraska for quarantine.
The individuals that are coming thus far have not been diagnosed with hantavirus, but should they develop symptoms and concerning for that diagnosis, we will definitely assess them and care for them in the biocontainment unit.
Joining us now is the former COVID response coordinator under President Biden, Dr. Ashish Jha. Doctor, first of all, I want to ask a dumb question, and that is it hantavirus or hantavirus?
Well, we've been wrestling with this all morning.
We have differing opinions on this. And then I grew up with this out west. I know, David, you spent some time there as a kid. I didn't think it spread like this. So how do we say it, and how does it spread, and how dangerous is it?
All right, 3 great questions. Good morning, and thanks for having me here. I've always called it hantavirus. That's what I was taught when I was in medical school. So let's go with hanta. Okay, most strains of hantavirus are spread from rodents to humans, and they don't spread from human to human. There's one strain that is an exception to that, and that's the Andes strain. And unfortunately, that's what we have on the cruise ship so far. It's a pretty dangerous virus. And so if you grew up in the American Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, you've probably heard of hantavirus. You usually get it from rodent droppings, getting aerosolized, and you breathe it in. 30-40% mortality rate, maybe even higher. So it's a pretty dangerous virus. Thankfully, we have not seen large outbreaks in the past, but this one is different, partly because it's the wrong strain, or it's a bad strain, the one that spreads. And it's ended up being on a cruise ship, which is a pretty good petri dish for a lot of viruses spreading.
My turn now for a 2-part question. The first is Nebraska. Why Nebraska? I remember this being a facility that was used during the Ebola outbreak, I think maybe during the early days of COVID as well. So that's my first part. The second is, what will happen to these patients when they get there? What does this quarantine look like in practice?
Yeah, 2 good questions. So Nebraska, we have these special pathogen units across the U.S. University of Nebraska Medical Center has got one of the best ones in the country. I'd argue one of the best in the world. The most dangerous pathogens, people who might be infected with them can go there. They've got fantastic safety protocols, some of the best clinicians in the world on these topics. So that's why Nebraska. That's why our Ebola patients went there, and that's why it's a good place for these folks to go. Look, I don't think, do I think they need that? I don't. I think they're doing it out of an abundance of caution. I think that's totally reasonable. What's going to happen is they're going to be monitored very closely. What we know about hantavirus in the one strain that spreads from people to people is usually only spreads when people have symptoms. So you could make the case that if they're feeling great, they don't have to be in a place like this. But again, I think out of caution, they're going to watch them very closely. Obviously, if any of them develop symptoms, they're going to need to get tested and treated. But that's going to be the plan.
I'm surprised how quickly this has gotten into people's minds, possibly because, we're all still a little scarred from COVID. Actually, the New York Times writes about COVID PTSD. And how this is a lingering legacy. I was walking down the street in New York, and some woman on the phone, young woman, said, I really just want to go meet my friends before the hantavirus takes us all. This was yesterday here. But it is serious. It sounds like it's unlikely to cause a huge outbreak, at least immediately. But if you are getting symptoms, what do those look like, and how quickly do they progress? What should you be on the lookout for?
Yeah. And I want to just reiterate, I think the chances that this is somehow going to become a big global outbreak is exceedingly low. It's just, I don't think it's going to happen. Now, let's talk about symptoms. The problem with this virus, like most viruses, they all start off about the same way. A fever, a headache, just feeling lousy. By the way, that's like, we all have symptoms like that when we get viral syndromes. It then progresses pretty rapidly. There are 2 forms. There's a pulmonary form where you get very severely short of breath. It really infects your lungs, and you can get very sick that way. There's another form where you get much more in the abdominal pain, infects your vessels, and you can get very sick and die in that other way. So it starts off pretty much like most viral syndromes, and then it can progress pretty quickly after that.
Ask about the vaccine for this. So Bloomberg reporting Moderna has done some early stage work on the vaccine for hantaviruses in the U.S. It's working with Vaccine Information Center at Korea University College of Medicine on a potential immunization. What's the status of the development of immunization for this? Is that something we should be looking for in your estimation here in short order?
Yeah, so look, the mRNA platform is awesome, and obviously we used it during COVID to get vaccines out to the American people very, very rapidly. As you probably know, Secretary Kennedy is not a fan, and therefore he's really blocked the development of mRNA vaccines here in the United States. I think, by the way, completely irrationally. There's no logic for that. So now companies like Moderna and European companies are working with other countries. In terms of the hantavirus vaccine, it's still pretty early stage. eventually would need to go through, kind of large clinical trials. There aren't that many people getting infected with this. So you're not going to see those trials. So it's not anywhere near prime time. But the good news is, I don't think we need it right now. I mean, we should develop it. Obviously, if it becomes a bigger outbreak, we should study it much more closely. But for most people, this is not going to be an issue. We're not going to be getting hantavirus vaccines anytime soon.
Since we have you, I do want to ask you, there's some reporting from the Wall Street Journal that President Trump has signed off on a plan to fire the FDA commissioner after policy fights about vaping, the abortion pills, and others. He was actually asked about it last night. We've got some sound for you.
What's going on with Marty McCary? Nothing much. Is he fired? Is he staying on?
Are you going to fire him?
I've been reading about it, but I know nothing about it.
So Trump saying, asked what he knows. He says he doesn't, is he going to do it? He says he knows nothing about it. What is your take on this and the state of play at the FDA right now, how well it's functioning and morale inside that agency?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, I don't know exactly what's happening in terms of Dr. McCary's status. There's all this confusion. I've been reading the same stuff that everybody else has. In terms of the FDA, I mean, I think what I would say is I actually was a pretty big fan of Marty. I have been for a long time, of him getting nominated. I think he has tried to do a good job. I think he's made some missteps. And it's been complicated because there's a lot of political pressure from his boss, the Secretary of HHS, to do certain things that I think a typical FDA commissioner would not face from a typical Secretary of HHS. So I think Marty's had a hard job. And as I said, I think he's very qualified to do this. How this plays out, I don't know. But the FDA is struggling because they've lost a ton of staff. They've been doged, and that has meant some of their best scientists have left. Marty's been managing a pretty difficult agency that's under a lot of stress because of some of those moves.
All right, Dr. Shisha, thank you so much for coming on and teaching us a lot, including how to pronounce Hantavirus.
There you go, Hantavirus. We know now. All right. Coming up next, we're going to speak with Congressman Ro Khanna, who is at the intersection of so many issues we've been talking about over the course of the morning on the Select Committee on China, on the Oversight Committee, who interviewed Howard Lutnick earlier this week, and on the Armed Services Committee as well. We're going to get his insights coming up here on Bloomberg This Weekend, on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. And Peter Magyar has been sworn in as Hungary's next prime minister. And this marks an official end to Viktor Orban's 16-year rule. Now, Magyar is a former Orban insider and has vowed to tackle corruption and unlock frozen European Union funds to boost Hungary's economy. He promises to repair ties with the EU and restore Hungary's place among Western democracies as early as the end of this decade. Well, in other news, Frontier Airlines says one of its planes struck a pedestrian on the runway leaving Denver International Airport last night. It forced the pilots to abort the takeoff as smoke filled the cabin. The aircraft, it was carrying 224 passengers, 7 crew members. No word on the condition of the person who was hit by that plane. The U.S. military struck another alleged drug trafficking boat. It took place in the eastern Pacific Ocean. 2 men were killed. 1 survived. U.S. Southern Command said it immediately notified the U.S. Coast Guard to activate the search and rescue system for that survivor. And the Pentagon started releasing hundreds of more declassified files, links to decades of UFO sightings. Now, they say the move allows Americans to study the material for themselves and decide whether aliens are real. It's part of a push from the Trump administration to provide more transparency to the public. David and Christina.
Selective transparency there on this issue, at least.
UFOs are transparent. So
yeah?
Good.
Okay.
Thanks, Lisa. You got it.
Cogitate on that for a while. All right, the Senate expected to vote next week on whether to confirm Kevin Warsh as the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. That vote could come just before Jerome Powell's last day as chair, which is slated for Friday, May the 15th.
That's right. Joining us now, Chris Anstey, Bloomberg's senior editor covering economic policy. Chris, thank you for coming in on a weekend. Just basically, what are we expecting at this confirmation hearing next week? I mean, Elizabeth Warren said this was the first fully partisan committee vote for a Fed chair in nominee history. Is that significant, and could that be a sign of more of those to come?
Yes. Well, remember, it's not a hearing. He had his hearing a couple of weeks ago, but it's the actual full Senate vote. which I think every Fed watcher expects indeed will show a quite partisan breakdown in getting Warsh to the chairmanship. And Senator Warren is not wrong in saying it is historically unusual for there to be a deep partisan divide over an incoming Fed chair. Some other historical comparisons also stand out. This is the first time certainly in modern memory that we have an incoming Fed chair who has strongly criticized the regime of the outgoing Fed chair. If you think back to transitions like when Jerome Powell took the baton on from Janet Yellen, or Bernanke took the baton from Alan Greenspan, there was a lot of continuity there. Nobody expected any kind of dramatic change. But this is, an incoming Fed chair in Kevin Warsh, who has been quite strident in his criticism of the Fed. Everything from their balance sheet policy to interest rates. So it is really kind of new territory here.
Chris, it's been a busy week for our colleague Michael McKee, who's interviewed two Fed presidents this week, Austin Goolsbee, Mary Daly as well. We heard from Susan Collins, another interview of our colleagues did at the Boston Fed, all of which are kind of inspired by the latest decision that we got from the FOMC and this dissent, three members of the committee dissenting on this issue of where rates go from here, given the fact that the Fed has not reached its 2% inflation target. Let's take a listen to an excerpt of Mike's interview with Austin Goolsbee out at the Hoover Institution's Monetary Policy Conference, talking about this, the challenges of hitting that 2% target.
If we get some progress on inflation and we show we're headed back to a path of on our way to 2% inflation, I'm optimistic rates can go down. We just haven't been having that now for some time, and that makes me more concerned, and I'm less optimistic.
Chris, what did we learn from Austin Goolsbee there? I'm going to paraphrase him. I think he said anybody who assumes that there's going to be a cut is somewhat foolish in thinking so, given where the economy is right now. What is his view emblematic of right now?
Well, it's emblematic of a shift among the broader community of Fed presidents and Fed board members. Remember that when Powell had his press conference after the most recent interest rate decision, he did point to there being a number of officials who shared the perspective of the three dissenters against the easing bias. And what we're seeing here is evidence that, Goolsbee could well line up with that. And certainly, Susan Collins said that to Bloomberg this week as well. So it speaks to a shift among Fed policymakers toward thinking that the risks between inflation, faster inflation, and a weaker employment rate are shifting really over to inflation more decisively.
I also want to ask you about the April jobs report. It came out yesterday, 115,000 jobs added, which was better and stronger than expected. Unemployment stayed around 4.3%, hourly earnings down slightly. I am habitually confused by this economy, and I'm wondering why we're seeing job growth despite inflation and price pressure for consumers. Those CPI numbers kind of unchanged, still high, especially with food and energy prices.
Yeah, I agree. There were a lot of confusing aspects of yesterday's report. And remember, the job report has two elements. One is a survey of employers, which produces the payroll figures, and the other is a survey of households, which yields the unemployment number. And the household survey really was, remarkably weak in a number of respects. It actually showed that employment declined for the fourth straight month. And actually, the unemployment rate did tick up if you go to the next decimal just a little bit last month. So, it's certainly, welcoming to see the payroll gains. Note that it was the first back-to-back gain in payrolls we've seen in a while. But if you look at 6-month averages, 12-month averages, this is a job market that has slowed down significantly over the past year. Still hanging in there, not as bad as many anticipated, given the shocks that we've had from, sticky inflation, tariff hikes, energy price hikes, and so on and so forth. But it's not a job market that is really roaring or powering aggregate economic growth.
Chris, let's move to the other side of the mandate, the Fed mandate here in the last question. And for those who don't know, Chris writes the Economics Daily newsletter on Bloomberg. Bloomberg.com/newsletter is well worth signing up for. So you're following all of these data releases and the undulations of the U.S. economy. Next week, PPI, CPI. What can we expect when we get those data from the federal government?
Sticky inflation, in 2 words. You look at the core CPI anticipation of 0.3%. That's just not consistent, really, with 2% steady state inflation that the Fed wants to see. It's notable that late yesterday, Goldman Sachs economists just pushed back their forecast for when the Fed will resume interest rate decreases to December. They pushed that back by a quarter, and they just think that inflation is sticking around much higher than the Fed really wants to see. They even saw a reasonable chance that there won't be any more Fed cuts. So they see 2 cuts coming December and then early next year. But the sticky inflation story seems to be here for the longer haul.
Chris Yancey, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you making me feel slightly better that you are also confused by some of those numbers.
You get in line. I think everyone's confused by this economy.
It does make me feel better.
Those who say they aren't, you should be skeptical of, I think, is my takeaway. Chris, thank you as well. Well, President Trump is expected to meet with President Xi in Beijing later this week, as we've been talking about over the course of the morning. That summit had been postponed because of the war in Iran, and you can guess the conflict will be high on the agenda when the heads of the world's 2 largest economies meet. They're also going to talk about trade issues, artificial intelligence, and fentanyl.
Our next guest is the ranking member of the House Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the U.S. and Chinese Communist Party. Congressman Khanna joins us this morning from Maplewood, Ohio, where he's leading a 3-day Heartland tour, visiting farms and factories. We want to get to that trip. We also want to get to the president's trip to China. But first, thank you for joining us. And I do want to ask you about that testimony on Wednesday with Howard Lutnick. You said regarding his connections to Epstein, he made a, quote, farce of the English language and that Trump would fire him if he heard what he said. And I wanted to ask you, are you sure about that? Are you sure you think the president would fire him if he knew what he said?
I am, because the president would see him sweating and mumbling and struggling to answer very basic questions. I mean, Howard Lutnick's testimony was that when he told the nation that he would never visit Epstein after 2005, that what he meant was that he himself would never visit Epstein, but it was fine for him, his wife, and his kid to visit Epstein's island. That just makes no sense. Anyone listening to it would know he was lying, and he was not honest. That's the real issue.
I want to ask about the Epstein Transparency Act and where we are in this process. So a signal moment, having the Commerce Secretary up on Capitol Hill testifying before the Oversight Committee. There was a lot of commentary early on that the Justice Department hadn't upheld its obligations to that act. Have they since? Are you satisfied with what you've gotten from the Justice Department? And indeed, where does this investigation, in part helmed by the Oversight Committee, go from here?
Well, it's been the largest release of documents over decades, 3 million files released. And they have shown an Epstein class that feels like they don't need to live by the rules, that treats these women as dispensable. But there's still 3 million files that need to be released. And the biggest thing that survivors tell me is they want to see investigations and prosecutions. There are people who abuse them, rape them, or traffic them in these files, and there haven't been any investigations or prosecutions. So we need the release of the remaining files, and we need investigations and prosecutions.
I was also wondering, and stick with me here, it is a bit of an odd question, but I'm wondering if you have any insight into why Melania Trump, seemingly out of nowhere, made that odd and rare public appearance in April, denying any connection with Epstein and calling for Congress to bring survivors forward to testify? Do you know what prompted that?
I don't, but I actually welcomed it because unlike her husband, who's calling these survivors a hoax, First Lady Trump is saying that they deserve to be heard. First Lady Trump is saying that there should be investigations and prosecutions. And the most important thing she said is Epstein was not alone. She knows that there were other men involved in abusing, trafficking, raping these young girls. And she is saying there needs to be an investigation, there needs to be prosecution, and she's contradicting her own husband. So what I would ask for the First Lady is to say, call on the Justice Department to release the remaining files and call on them to begin investigations and prosecutions.
Congressman Khanna, as we mentioned, this trip is coming up this week, this postponed trip the president's taking to Beijing to meet with President Xi. You're the ranking member of this committee on China. And I'm curious sort of how you see the importance of this visit and indeed what you hope will come out of it. What is a good outcome in your estimation of this trip where the leaders of the two largest economies in the world are going to meet?
Well, I've been in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan talking to our farmers, talking to our factory workers. Let me offer 4 things we need to do. First, we need to get a deal for China to buy more of our soybeans. The farmers have been hurt. They're buying now from Argentina. They're buying from South America. They're not buying from our farmers. Second, we need to make sure that they're not sending their ships to our ports without a fee. We suspended this fee, and China's using their ships in our ports that are hurting American shipbuilding. Third, we need to find some way to lower the cost of fertilizer. It's really hurting a lot of our farmers. It's hurting a lot of the food prices in the United States. That means getting them not to have export controls on that. And that means figuring out how we open up the Strait of Hormuz. And finally, we need to make sure that they are not dumping into the United States. They continue to have unfair trade practices, and we need to clamp down on that.
Historically, the Chinese have been very adept and very tenacious negotiators, especially when it comes to matters of the economy. We've been talking this morning about how the Treasury Secretary has laid the groundwork and established a relationship with his counterpart in Beijing. But I'm wondering if you think this administration, if you think President Trump is ready to go toe-to-toe with the Chinese, if he can get successfully the things you were all just talking about out of these negotiations.
Well, he hasn't shown that ability so far. Obviously, I'm rooting for him because he's the American president, but we've lost 80,000 manufacturing jobs on his watch. We've seen 316 farm bankruptcies on his watch compared to 215 the year President Biden was in office. We've seen the trade deficit for the United States actually increase. We've seen the cost of inputs increase because of blanket tariffs. So he has a lot that he has to reverse. We've had China hold us hostage on rare earths and critical minerals. I want a deal that actually helps American farmers, American shipbuilders, American manufacturers, and I hope he will work to get that. He hasn't so far.
Part of that committee's remit, as I understand it, is to look at this balance of power, this level of competition between the U.S. And China. And I'm curious how you see that dynamic at play right now. So we had just a few days ago Iran's foreign minister going to Beijing to meet with China's foreign minister. It's clear that China, by not getting actively involved in this conflict in the Middle East, is positioned, shall we say, differently from the U.S. right now. And perhaps that's something I think advantageous to the Chinese leadership. It's not a war that's draining resources from them. Sure, they'd like to have the energy that's stalled in the Strait of Hormuz. How do you see that competitive dynamic, and how worried are you about the degree to which the U.S., the administration, is paying attention to that binary between the U.S. and China?
Well, I'm concerned that we're draining our resources in a war in Iran. We haven't been able to get their enriched uranium out. Iran's regime is more hardline, with the IRGC having more control. Iran has more control over the Strait of Hormuz. It's cost us billions of dollars. and it's increased our food prices. And China basically is just watching from the sideline. They're not sinking that money into the Middle East. They're sinking that money into building their ships, into building alternative energy, renewable energy, into building their economy. So what I want is for the United States to be putting our resources in investing in manufacturing here at home, jobs here at home, research and innovation here at home, and not getting sucked into the Middle East. That's a drain of our resources.
Congressman, I do want to ask you a more armed services-y question, and that's there's this report in the Washington Post about U.S. intelligence analyzing the data and saying that Iran is situated to last at least 3 or 4 more months of this blockade before really feeling the economic pressure. When it comes to a war of attrition, if you're looking at Iran versus the U.S. versus even China, how long they're willing to sit this out, do you think the American public and people, real people who you've been talking to in the Midwest, are going to give the president the benefit of the doubt for this conflict for 3 to 4 more months, given what it's doing to prices of almost everything?
No, it's because we're spending $1 billion to $2 billion a day, but that's not just the cost. I mean, when I asked Pete Hegseth, what's the cost? He said it's a gotcha question, but Pete Hegseth may want to go out to Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania because the cost is the increased cost of gas. The cost is the increased cost of diesel. The cost is the increased cost of fertilizer. All of that means increased costs for Americans when it comes to food, when it comes to their rent, when it comes to filling up their tanks this summer. And that's not a worth in Iran that is more hardline and that still has enriched uranium. So we haven't achieved anything, and we've created enormous economic hardship on the American people. We need to end this war. We need negotiation that opens the Strait of Hormuz, allows gas, allows diesel, allows fertilizers prices to fall.
How blind are you, other lawmakers flying right now? I guess it's no small thing that the defense secretary did make his way to Capitol Hill to answer some questions, not all of them, but at least some of them. I think when we first heard about the funding request the administration was making, there was some speculation that lawmakers would welcome that as an opportunity to kind of use that to get Secretary Hegseth and others on the Hill to answer questions about this conflict, about the trajectory of this war. How much confidence do you have in your understanding of what the administration wants to do and where this war is headed?
The administration doesn't have a clear strategic goal. First, they said they wanted regime change. Now they acknowledge that the regime that's in place is actually more hardline than Khamenei. Then they said they wanted the nuclear energy out and for Iran to be denucleared. Now they acknowledge that enriched uranium is still buried under Iran's soil. Then they said, well, they want the Strait of Hormuz to be open. Well, the Strait of Hormuz was open before this war. So now we have to figure out how do we get the Strait of Hormuz open. There is no strategic goal. The strategic goal right now should be the immediate opening of the Strait of Hormuz, the end to these hostilities, not shooting at each other so that the price of food and the price of gas can drop, and then negotiation with the international community to get Iran to commit on getting enriched uranium out and inspections, something Obama had achieved that Trump tore up.
The president has been very frustrated with European allies who've so far been unwilling to engage directly in either helping with the blockade or helping American action in the region. Part of the repercussions of that are he has now threatened to take a significant number of troops out of Germany after the chancellor had some harsh words about Trump and saying he was getting played by the Iranians. Are you concerned that that will really happen? And at what level do you worry it will impact American operational abilities? Because those are big bases. The U.S. relies on them for a heck of a lot of stuff in that theater. Why is he doing this? And are you concerned it's going to impact military readiness?
Well, I'm concerned that he's doing it in a retaliatory way. If he wants to look at lessening our footprint on our 800 bases overseas to reduce cost, that's a separate conversation. But he shouldn't be threatening the German chancellor with our troop presence in Germany because the German chancellor doesn't want to engage in a blockade that isn't being effective in the Strait of Hormuz. What we need to do is bring along our European allies, like President Obama did, to put pressure on Iran to have a deal that forces them to submit to inspection and give up their enriched uranium. Obviously, the military option didn't work. Yes, the military destroyed Iran's navy. Yes, it destroyed Iran's air force. That may weaken them regionally, but it did nothing in terms of getting them the enriched uranium out. And for that, we need our European allies, NATO, and diplomacy.
Let me pivot from the shooting war in the Middle East, shooting war in Europe, to the political war here in the United States over congressional districts. And as I said, you're uniquely positioned. You're on Armed Services Oversight, the China Committee. You're also from the great state of California, which is wrestling with some of these issues having to do with congressional districts. I'm curious what your reaction is to what we've seen in recent weeks out of Virginia, the Virginia Supreme Court ruling that the redrawn districts that were passed by voters there does not comport with the state's constitution, obviously a setback for Democrats. We saw the ruling from the Supreme Court on the Voting Rights Act. Where do you see this war, that political war, heading as we see Republicans and Democrats going back and forth on the way those congressional districts are drawn?
Well, the Virginia decision was overruling Virginia voters. I mean, Virginia voters just voted on maps. And for the Virginia Supreme Court to invalidate an election is deeply anti-democratic. And then for the U.S. Supreme Court to gut voting rights in the Deep South, to not understand that there's racially polarized voting in the Deep South is completely out of touch and undermining the efforts of the civil rights movement. I mean, they're going after Jim Clyburn's district. There was not a black member in Congress in South Carolina for 100 years between Reconstruction and Jim Crow. Jim Clyburn won that seat in 1992 because they drew a black majority district, and they're trying to eliminate that. They're trying to eliminate the work of the voting rights and civil rights movement, eliminating black majority districts in the South. It's deeply concerning, and not on a political level, just on a level of anyone who cares about civil rights and black representation in America.
So what are you going to do about this? What are Democrats going to do? And at this point, is this a map Democrats can reasonably win and hope to flip either of these bodies in November?
We're going to win the House. We'll win despite all of these games. My concern is, what is this doing in terms of our civil rights representation? I would encourage people to watch Jamie Harrison's passionate defense of black majority districts in South Carolina and beyond when he spoke at the South Carolina legislative session. And I do believe that we can convince in some of these legislators not to do what they're thinking of doing, eliminating black districts. It's not right for the country, and it may actually backfire on them, creating more Democratic districts in the process. So as they eliminate black districts, they may actually be creating more Democratic opportunities. So we're going to be fighting in each one of these states to make sure that they don't eliminate these districts.
What do you say to the viewer of Bloomberg Television, the listener to Bloomberg Radio, who sees the gentleman from Fremont, California in Maplewood, Ohio, and wonders if this gentleman has higher aspirations than representing a congressional district in California? And if you demur on answering that directly, what does the Democratic Party need to know from the places that you've been spending the last three days visiting?
I'm here in my capacity as the top Democrat on the China Select Committee, and I'm here with colleagues from Michigan, from Pennsylvania, from Ohio. But what I would say is the Democratic Party needs to spend more time in places in rural America, on farms, in factory towns, and then understand that they're upset. They're upset with both parties. They've seen manufacturing job loss. They've seen the prices increase. They've seen wealth pile up in districts like mine in Silicon Valley, while the American dream seems farther out of reach here. And we need to offer a vision. I call it economic patriotism, a new industrial bank that invests in communities, 1,000 new trade schools, a new sense of tech institutes across America, a trade agenda that actually opens up foreign markets for our farmers. So we need to offer an economic agenda for the future.
So you're exploring running for president?
Well, right now I'm exploring what the agenda for the China Committee and House Democrats should be. But I do believe whoever runs to represent our party and our nation should have a comprehensive economic agenda for the future. I think that's the central issue. How are we going to improve the lives of Americans in many of these places that were hollowed out after NAFTA, hollowed out after China came into the World Trade Organization? What is our vision for bringing them back, for having economic security and economic independence?
Congressman Khanna, thank you very much for being so generous with your time. Again, joining us from Maplewood, Ohio this morning on his tour of Heartland States. He heads to Michigan this afternoon. Very much appreciate the time and you engaging on all of these important issues. Christina, again, he sits on so many important committees and is in such a unique position to talk about so much of what we've been discussing over the course of the morning and the last few weeks.
Across absolutely everything. And another person who's across absolutely everything is Lisa Mateo. She's got the headlines for us right now.
And this story just coming across the terminal. A tanker carrying liquefied natural gas from Qatar is attempting to transit the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if successful, it would mark the country's first export out of the region since the Iran war began. Ship tracking data that's compiled by Bloomberg, it shows the tanker is currently in the waterway between Oman and Iran. Well, to Wall Street now, where the New York Stock Exchange is reportedly set to open a private members club. Sources tell the Financial Times the invite-only club, it'll be located in a renovated vault that formerly housed stock certificates, with plans to open this summer. To sports we go, and the PGA Tour holding 2 events this weekend at the Truist Championship in Charlotte, North Carolina. Sungjae Im, he tops the leaderboard at 9 under par. And at the One Flight Myrtle Beach Classic in South Carolina, you have Aaron Rai. He takes the lead over Brandt Snedeker and Mark Hubbard. Nailed it. And in the NBA playoffs, the Knicks, they are up to Game 3. They're 3 games to none against the Philadelphia 76ers. They beat them 108-94 last night. New York will have their chance to take the series tomorrow afternoon. I'll be tuning in. The Pistons, Cavaliers, as well as the Thunder and the Lakers, they play Game 3 today. David and Christina.
It's a busy weekend for you. Going to watch all that golf.
I know.
I know you're going to go home and watch all of these golf tournaments that are taking place and then pivot to the Knicks game tomorrow. But in truth, it was a great game last night.
It was a great game. I wore my Knicks hat
by
today.
A bunch at the beginning, made up that deficit pretty quickly, and really a battle, not till the end, but to the third quarter.
That golf, how you feel about golf is how I feel with
Right
either
now.
of you two are talking baseball or basketball.
Yeah.
It's all right. It's good. That's why I'm here.
It's all right. Actually, Lisa, you're going to love this next segment because it is difficult enough to run a marathon. Now imagine doing 10 of those in the same race.
No.
We're going to talk to one super athlete who's breaking records left and right.
And just a reminder, you can take us with you no matter where you go. You can watch us on Bloomberg TV, listen on Bloomberg Radio. Of course, you can stream the show on the Bloomberg Business app. Wherever you are, we are there. It is Bloomberg This Weekend. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. All right, Cocodona is a 250-mile, 3-day endurance race in Flagstaff, Arizona. Competitors can stop whenever they want. They can eat, they can change shoes, or take dirt naps on the side of the trail. But it all counts towards their time fastest wins. This week, the fastest man or woman was Rachel Entrekin. Yes, you heard that correctly. She smashed the course record and beat her previous record by, I think it's 7 hours. Rachel, is that right? She joins us now. I believe you're in Flagstaff, Arizona. Thank you so much. I sent you a desperate Instagram message after seeing this story and you agreed to come on, so I'm very grateful. 7 hours? 7 hours?
Yeah, I don't know the math because I've had like 5 hours of sleep since Monday, basically. But yeah, last year I did it in about 63 or 64 hours. And then this year it was 56. So whatever that math is,
can I ask
how much I beat it by.
The why question here? I mean, I've had friends who have done standard marathons. They want to see a city in a new way or get a T-shirt. What is the motivation that drives an ultramarathoner like you? And this is like a serious ultramarathon. I mean, I've seen some that are like 50 miles or more. This is an incredible distance.
This is massive, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, as you do something like a marathon, the more times you do it, I guess relatively easier it gets. And so in order to kind of chase that next challenge, you have to do one of two things. You either have to run it faster or you have to find something that is longer. I really like the multi-day races because I think that there are so many things that can prove to be really challenging during all that time that you're out there, and you have to kind of figure out how to manage those things while still moving forward. So I just think that they're really fun. It's exactly the same though. Like I want to get a T-shirt and see cool stuff too. So.
I do want to say you don't have to do a longer race. You don't have to, but I know Lisa's got a question.
Well, nobody has to do anything.
Nobody has to do. Yes. How do you recuperate? I mean, do you give your body time to rest? Like, what kind of beating has your body taken over the years from all this?
Yeah, I actually feel okay. I'm just really, really tired. But like physically, I feel okay. I actually feel really lucky compared to a lot of the other folks that I've like met, because I really enjoy going to the finish line and like cheering in folks. And after this race in particular, I've had to do a ton of interviews. So I guess that's been my recovery. But you know, I've been chatting with other people and like looking at their feet and like watching them try to get up from a chair. It's just like, holy crap. I think I'm actually very lucky in that regard, because you know, my feet feel okay, and I'm just really sleepy because I woke up at 4 a.m. yesterday to go watch one of my friends finish. Wow. Which isn't exactly conducive to recovery, but that's whatever. I'll sleep next week. Yeah, I'll sleep next
theory
week.
and news too, although we're not running while we're doing this. All right, so over 3 days, I think you took 3 10-minute naps. You averaged a 13-minute pace, and I understand mashed potatoes played a huge role. You want to talk us through like how you get through this? I can't believe you don't really sleep. How do you get your body to do that?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know. But yeah, I slept for 5 minutes actually. So it was a 5-minute nap, and then I took 2 7-minute naps. But my goal last year I slept for, I think, probably like 30 minutes. And then the year previous, because I've done this race quite a lot, the year prior I slept for about 3 hours, kind of spread out over the course of like 3 days, basically. But yeah, I don't actually know how anybody does this, to be honest with you. But when you have to, you figure it out. So, and you know, for me, the way that I frame doing this race is like, you know, our objective is to try to get to Flagstaff fastest. And so anything that I'm doing that is not
running,
directing me towards Flagstaff is like not helping me accomplish my goal. So yeah, a lot of caffeine abuse probably. But, and then, yeah, I make a joke that a lot of the foods that I like eating are just beige. So I eat a lot of things like rice and mashed potatoes, are really good during things like this.
Can you take us into the mind of Rachel Entrekin during this race? I remember reading a piece, I think it was in the New York Times, about another ultra in Tennessee, famous one.
Oh,
and
yes.
like you do it and you
Barkley,
kind of go through this amazing like psychological moment where like, I mean, I've stayed up late, you know, through the night, and that has an effect on me, like not speaking coherently and thinking straight. Like what is going through your mind as you hit like day 2 of this and you've slept for 5 minutes total? Is it a mantra? Are you totally out of body? Like what's happening?
I guess every year I've probably come up with some sort of mantra. Last year, I remember my mantra was just get to Flagstaff. Okay. So anytime I was frustrated or like felt like I was going slow or just like wanted to quit, it was like, nope, like you signed up for this because you want to see what happens when you are pushed to your limits. And like the first year I did this race, I won this race. I've won this race, I guess, every year that I've done it. And I remember I got to the finish line and I was I was unbelievably tired. And I'd never experienced that type of fatigue before. And I was just really grumpy and I was really like ungrateful for like what had just happened. And I didn't like that. And so every year since, one of my goals has just been to like have a better attitude. Yeah. And I do think that that's something that you can choose. And I think that this race is a really excellent setting for me to practice being happy when all things should indicate I need to go to sleep. You know?
Rachel, we're going to have you on it. We have a million more questions. Thank you so much. Please rest. And thank you for joining us and just kicking total butt out there. It was inspirational to watch.
And thanks to all of you for watching us here on Bloomberg This Weekend. Tomorrow we're going to speak with the chairman of the Republican National Committee. Hope you join us starting at 7 o'clock Wall Street time.